It is said that in Blackridge there are two kinds of men, those who fear Dorian Voss and those who died because they didn't fear him soon enough. Tonight, one man sells his daughter to pay off debts. Another stands before the altar, receiving a bride he never asked for. And a woman enters this marriage as if stepping on a knife, eyes open, heart closed, awaiting the worst. But tonight will not unfold the way any of them expect. Tonight, a wedding dress tears, and everything changes forever. Please like, comment the city you're viewing so I know how far this story has progressed. And don't leave, because the worst is yet to come. The rain started at 6 in the evening and hadn't stopped since. It came down in sheets against the stained glass windows of the Aldermere Cathedral, the kind of rain that sounded like applause, or punishment, depending on who you asked. The streets outside had gone dark early, the gas lamps along Voss-owned territory guttering in the wind, their amber light smearing across wet cobblestone like spilled whiskey. No one walked those streets tonight unless they had to, and in Blackridge, everyone always had to. Inside the cathedral, 300 guests sat in pressed silence. They had come dressed in their finest, silk, diamonds, tailored wool, but no one looked comfortable. No one looked happy. They held their programs like men hold court summons, with both hands, tight, waiting for the part where your name gets called. Half of them were Dorian Voss's business associates. The other half were politicians, judges, and police commissioners who had long since stopped pretending they didn't work for him too. They had RSVP'd within the hour of receiving their invitations. No one declined a Voss event. At the front of the cathedral, Dorian stood at the altar. He was 31 years old and looked older in the way that men who have spent years making decisions about other people's lives always look older. His face was angular and still, the kind of stillness that wasn't peace but control, the way a loaded weapon is still when it's waiting. He wore a black suit that had been cut specifically for his frame, no tie, the top button of his white shirt left open. Not from carelessness, from preference. He had told his tailor once, "I don't wear a collar for anyone." The tailor had nodded and never suggested one again. His jaw was set. His eyes tracked the door at the far end of the nave without blinking. He wasn't nervous. Dorian Voss hadn't been nervous in years. He had outlived the emotions somewhere around the time he'd taken over the Voss syndicate at 23 and started making the kind of choices that either kill a man fast or make him incapable of feeling small things. Nervousness was a small thing. What he felt now was something different, something closer to the feeling he got before a negotiation he hadn't fully mapped, when there were variables he couldn't control. He didn't like variables. Serafina Vale was a variable. He hadn't asked for her. That was important to understand. The arrangement had come through channels, delivered to him through Marcus Hale, his chief counsel and the closest thing Dorian had to a friend, which wasn't saying much, in the form of a proposal from a man named Edmund Vale. Edmund had debts across 4 of the 6 major syndicates operating in Blackridge. He had borrowed against businesses he didn't own, properties that had been seized, futures that weren't his to sell. He had run out of everything, and so he had offered the one thing he had left with his name on it. Dorian had said no, initially. He had no interest in marriage. He had no interest in whatever story Edmund Vale had constructed around the transaction to make it sound like an arrangement rather than what it was. He had his empire. He had order. A wife was chaos. But Marcus had pushed back, which Marcus almost never did. "There are things about that family you need to understand," Marcus had said. "Things that touch our operations directly. The Vale girl is connected to something larger than her father's debts, Dorian. You'd be wise to learn what before someone else does." Dorian had sat with that for 3 days. Then he had called Edmund Vale and told him yes. He still wasn't sure he'd made the right choice. That bothered him more than anything else. The doors at the end of the nave opened. The string quartet, Voss hired, Voss chosen, playing the exact piece he had specified because no one in this city made music choices at a Voss event without Voss approval, shifted into something slower and lower. The guests turned. Even the men who had been staring at their phones put them away. You didn't miss the entrance at a Voss wedding, not if you wanted to keep your seat at every future table this city had to offer. Serafina came through the doors alone, no father at her side. Edmund Vale sat in the second row, which Dorian had arranged specifically. He'd told Edmund that tradition was irrelevant, that no one was being given to anyone, that they were two individuals entering a contract. Edmund had accepted this explanation without argument. Men like Edmund Vale always found a way to agree with whatever kept them alive and solvent. But the truth was simpler. Dorian hadn't wanted to watch Edmund Vale walk down that aisle next to her. He hadn't wanted to watch the man touch her arm and smile. He watched her walk instead, and something in his chest shifted in a way he didn't immediately have a word for. She was 24. He knew that from the file Marcus had prepared. He knew her height, her education, a degree in fine arts from Aldermere University, never used, her allergies, her medical history up to 4 years ago when records stopped because she'd stopped seeing doctors. He knew she had no close friends, no active social media presence, no financial independence of any kind. He knew she liked to paint. He knew she hadn't, in years. He knew facts. He hadn't known this. She wore white because that was what brides wore. And someone, not her he would later learn, but a stylist Edmund had hired for appearances, had put her in a gown with a long train and a structured bodice and long sleeves that covered her arms to the wrists. Her dark hair was pinned up in a way that looked precise and expensive and nothing like the girl underneath it, he suspected. She held a small bouquet of white flowers in both hands, like something to press against in case the rest of her started to shake. She was shaking, not visibly, not to most of the room, but Dorian watched people for a living. He read bodies the way other men read contracts, the micro-tension in her forearms, the way her jaw was set just slightly too hard, the fraction of a second longer than normal that it took her to lift her eyes when she reached the first pew, checking the geography of the room the way people do when they're mapping exits. She was terrified. He had expected that. He had told himself it wouldn't matter. He had been wrong. She reached the altar and stopped, looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark, nearly black in the cathedral light, and they held something he hadn't expected. Not just fear, defiance. The specific kind of defiance that has been beaten down so many times it lives in the bones now, barely visible, but not gone. Never entirely gone. He held her gaze, didn't look away, didn't smile. She didn't either. The officiant began speaking. Dorian didn't register most of it. He was still watching her breathe, watching the way she controlled it, steady in and out, forcing calm into a body that wanted to run. He'd seen soldiers do that. He'd seen his own men do it before engagements. He'd never seen a woman do it at her own wedding. "Do you, Dorian Elias Voss, take this woman?" "Yes," he said, before the sentence finished, not from eagerness, from efficiency. He had already decided. Drawing it out served no one. Serafina's eyes flicked to him at that, surprised. He didn't know what she'd expected. Hesitation, maybe, or cruelty delivered with ceremony, but not efficiency. Not the absence of performance. "Do you, Serafina Margot Vale, take this man?" A pause. One beat longer than it needed to be. "Yes," she said. Her voice didn't shake. That cost her something. He could see it cost her. They signed the documents. They did not kiss. Dorian had specified that as well. The guests applauded with the careful enthusiasm of people who understand their applause is a performance they are being graded on. Dorian turned from the altar and offered Serafina his arm. She took it with both hands and held it with the lightest grip possible. Barely contact, barely commitment. The way you hold onto a rope you're not sure will hold. They walked out of the cathedral together into the rain-hammered night. The reception lasted 2 hours. Dorian spent most of it conducting business in a side room, which was the only reason he had agreed to a reception at all. Serafina sat at the head table beside an empty seat and spoke when spoken to and ate nothing, which he noted when Marcus caught his eye across the room and tilted his head toward her with an expression that said, "Pay attention." He paid attention. She was working very hard at being invisible. In a room full of men who wanted her to perform gratitude and radiance and submission, she was instead performing nothing. Perfect stillness, perfect compliance, zero surface. It was the most sophisticated coping mechanism he'd encountered in a room that had seen professional liars at work all evening. At 10 o'clock, he ended it. He came back to the head table, leaned down, and said quietly near her ear, We're leaving. Not a question, not cruel, just information. She nodded without looking at him and set her napkin on the table and stood. Her posture was straight. She was still controlling her breathing. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the Voss Tower, 42 stories above Blackridge's waterfront. The elevator ride was silent. The bodyguards who had ridden up with them dispersed at the floor below. Dorian had a standing arrangement that the top floor was a private space, no security presence unless summoned. He unlocked the penthouse door and stepped back for her to enter first. She hesitated for a fraction of a second at the threshold. He watched that hesitation and felt something cold move through him, not from her fear, but from his sudden awareness of what she must be expecting. What every signal in her life had trained her to expect from a room she entered that a powerful man had just unlocked. "The secondary bedroom is down the hall, second door on the left," he said. "It's yours." She turned and looked at him. The first time all night she'd looked at him with something other than armor. "What?" "Your room," he said. "Second door on the left. There's a bathroom attached. If you need anything, there's a phone on the kitchen counter. Press 0. Someone will answer." "This isn't—" She stopped. Started again. "I understood this arrangement to be—" "I know what you understood," he said. He walked past her toward the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. The housekeeper had stocked it that morning per his instructions. He got a glass of water and set it on the counter. "Whatever you understood, it isn't that. Go to sleep, Serafina." He used her name. Not Mrs. Voss. Her name. She stood in the hallway for another moment. He didn't watch her. He heard her exhale, a slow, controlled release of about 3 seconds of held breath, like a valve finally allowed to turn. Then the sound of her footsteps moving down the hall, the click of a door. He stood in the kitchen in the quiet of his own penthouse and looked at the water glass and tried to identify what he was feeling. He came up blank. That was new. He slept for 4 hours. He always slept for 4 hours. He had conditioned himself to it in his early 20s when sleep was a liability, and 4 hours was the compromise between functionality and survival. He woke at 3 in the morning and moved through the dark penthouse out of habit, checking locks, reviewing the overnight messages on his secured phone, the way men who have been responsible for an empire since age 23 do at 3 in the morning, because the weight of it doesn't dissolve just because the day is technically over. He passed her door, sound from inside. Not crying, he was braced for crying, had thought about how he would handle it if they were crying, had no adequate answer for how to handle it. Not crying. Something else. A quiet, sharp sound, like fabric. Then silence. Then the quiet, precise sound again. He stood in the hall and identified the sound after a moment. She was awake, moving. He didn't know what she was doing. He went back to bed. In the morning, she was in the kitchen before him. She had found the coffee and made a full pot without asking, which surprised him. She was wearing clothes she had apparently packed herself. Dark trousers, a long-sleeved gray shirt buttoned to the throat, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked younger. She looked more real. She didn't look at him when he came in. "I didn't know how you took it," she said. "Coffee. There's a full pot." "Black," he said. "Okay." He poured a cup and sat at the counter. She was standing at the window, looking out at the morning city. 42 floors of glass between her and the rest of Blackridge. "How long has this arrangement been planned?" she asked, still looking at the window. 4 months, he said. "And you've known about my father's situation for—" "About the same." A pause. "Did he ask you to keep me out of the city? Keep me away from—" She stopped. "Away from what?" She turned from the window. Her expression had closed back down, the armor sliding back into place. "Nothing. Never mind." He wanted to push. He didn't. He had learned, in years of getting information from people who didn't want to give it, that the moment you push is usually the moment the door closes permanently. He drank his coffee and looked at his phone and let the silence be silence. She went back to her room after a few minutes. He heard the door close. He sat in the kitchen and looked at the city and thought about the file Marcus had prepared, about the gaps in her medical history, the 4 years of invisible living, the fine arts degree that led nowhere, the complete absence of a life that had been built outside the Vale household. He thought about the way she mapped exits in rooms she didn't know. He called Marcus at 7:30. "I need everything on Edmund Vale you haven't given me yet," he said. "Not the financial history. The other history." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Dorian, everything," he said. "Today." He hung up and looked at the hallway where her door was closed. Outside, the rain had stopped. Black Ridge glittered in the early morning light with the particular cold beauty of a city that had survived another night of its own worst impulses. That evening, he was in the study when he heard something fall. He was at his desk, working through the consolidated reports Marcus had delivered, making notes, doing the quiet, violent arithmetic of running an empire, when there was a sound from the hallway. Not a crash, not something breaking, just a small impact, fabric against floor. He didn't move immediately. He waited. He heard no follow-up sounds. He went to the hallway. She was on the floor outside the bathroom door. Not fallen. She had sat down, back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. She was still wearing the gray shirt. She looked up at him when he appeared, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite embarrassment and wasn't quite shame, and had elements of both, and also something else he couldn't name. "I'm fine," she said, preemptively, like she'd said it many times before, like it was automatic. "You're sitting on the floor," he said. "I know where I am." He looked at her for a moment, sat down against the opposite wall, not beside her. Across from her, his back against the wall, long legs stretched out in front of him, because sometimes the least threatening position is maximum distance at the same level. She watched him do this with evident surprise. "You don't have to, she started. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I'm sitting." She looked at him for another moment. He looked at the ceiling. "I have bad nights sometimes," she said finally. Her voice was measured. It's not a thing you need to worry about." "I'm not worried," he said. "I'm sitting." Something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly. More like the precise moment when a person who has prepared for an attack realizes the attack isn't coming and doesn't know what to do with their hands. She sat on the floor across from him, and they didn't speak for several minutes. Outside the tall windows at the end of the hall, Black Ridge hummed and glittered and went about its complicated dark business, indifferent to the two people sitting on the floor 42 stories above it, figuring out what they were to each other. He was about to say something, he wasn't sure what, something that would probably come out wrong, when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Marcus. The message was 3 words. "I found something." He looked up from the phone. Serafina was watching him. He couldn't tell if the shift in his expression had given him away, or if she was just good at reading people who'd spent years learning not to show anything. "Business?" she said. "Always," he said. He stood, looked down at her. She was looking up at him, still with her back against the wall, knees still pulled to her chest, long-sleeved shirt covering everything it was covering. And for the first time, sitting in the specific light of the hallway, he saw it. Barely. Just at the edge of the cuff. A discoloration. The specific kind of discoloration that isn't a bruise anymore because bruises fade, but what they leave underneath, if they're bad enough, often doesn't. He looked at his phone. He looked back at her cuff. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. He walked back to his study and closed the door and called Marcus. "Tell me," he said. Marcus's voice was different than usual. Marcus was a man who had been Dorian's counsel for 7 years and had delivered bad news about bodies, betrayals, and collapsing agreements without his voice changing. His voice changed now. "The Vale girl's medical records," Marcus said. "I got into the sealed files, the ones from before she was 18. The room was very quiet. Dorian sat at his desk and didn't move. "How bad?" he said. "Dorian." Marcus almost never used his first name in work contexts. "You need to see these yourself. I'm sending them now, but I need you to understand something before you open them." A pause. "Your father-in-law isn't just a man with gambling debts." The files hit his phone. He opened the first one, looked at the date. She would have been 11. He looked at the document. Read the clinical language that had been written by a hospital intake physician and then filed and sealed and never followed up on because the name Vale meant something in this city, and the name of the man who brought her in meant even more. His hand on the desk pressed flat against the surface. He read the second file. She would have been 13. Outside his study window, Blackridge glittered and hummed. Beautiful and indifferent and rotten 3 layers down, the way this city always was. Dorian sat at his desk for a long time after he'd read every file Marcus had sent. He sat in the specific stillness of a man who has spent years building an identity around controlled rage. Rage aimed outward, toward enemies, toward rivals, toward the specific category of people who break the rules of engagement he has established for himself. He sat in that stillness and felt something inside it shift, like a foundation settling. There was a noise from down the hall, the soft sound of her door opening, then the quiet of her moving through the kitchen, the clink of a glass, the sound of water. He sat very still, because there were files in his hands with her name on them from when she was 11 years old, and the man who had sold her to him 8 days ago was connected to something that went far deeper than gambling debts. And Marcus had said, "You need to see these yourself," in a voice that had never changed before. And tomorrow morning, when she came into the kitchen in her gray shirt with her coffee and her careful, controlled breathing, he would have to look at her face and say nothing, because he had no idea yet what he was going to do. Because for the first time in 8 years of ruling this city, Dorian Voss did not have a plan. The files were still open on his phone when the power in the penthouse flickered. Brief, 1 second, back on. Normal, probably. Weather interference. The city was full of aging infrastructure held together with Voss money and political favors. He looked at his phone. A new message from Marcus. Not texts this time. A single photograph. He opened it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he called Marcus back, and when Marcus answered, Dorian said very quietly the words that would set everything that was coming into motion. "Who else has seen this?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. That in itself was information. Marcus Hale answered every call from Dorian Voss within 2 rings, had done so for 7 years through negotiations that had ended in bloodshed and deals that had saved lives and 3 a.m. emergencies that were never actually emergencies but had to be treated like them anyway. 2 rings. Always. This time it was 4. 2 people, Marcus said when he finally picked up. Myself and the man I paid to pull the records. He's been handled. Handled how? Relocated. Generously. He understands the terms. Dorian looked at the photograph on his phone. And before you got to it, who had access to this originally? That's the problem, Marcus said. The file wasn't in the standard sealed archive. It was in a secondary system, a private record management service used by 3 specific institutions in Blackridge. Clinic on the East Waterfront, the Aldermere Private Hospital, and a pause that was half a second too long. The Harrow Foundation. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. The Harrow Foundation. Publicly, a charitable organization funding healthcare access and youth services across the city's lower districts. Privately, and this was a private that Dorian had suspected for 2 years without being able to confirm, something else entirely. Something that moved people the way other organizations moved money. How deep, Dorian said. I don't know yet. That's what worries me. Find out. He looked at the hallway. The light under her door was off now. And Marcus, the photograph, the one you just sent me. Where did it come from? Another pause. Longer this time. It was attached to the file, Marcus said, but it wasn't taken by the hospital. The metadata. It was taken inside the Vale residence, 11 years ago. Someone documented it and then buried it inside a medical record where it would never be found unless you knew exactly which system to access. Dorian said nothing. Someone protected it, Marcus said quietly. Someone wanted a record to exist even if it was never meant to be found. Do you understand what I'm saying? He understood. Somewhere, 11 years ago, someone had taken that photograph of a child's injuries and hidden it inside a system that only very specific people could access, in a city where that child's last name meant the wound would otherwise disappear entirely. Someone had made a record because they believed the record might matter someday. Get me everything on the Harrow Foundation by morning, Dorian said. Everything you can find without touching the surface. Don't make noise. There's something else, Marcus said. Dorian waited. Edmund Vale had a meeting 2 weeks before he came to us with the arrangement. Off calendar, no record on his end. I found it through the other party's scheduling system. He met with a man named Carver, Renwick Carver. He runs logistics operations out of the South Port. I know who Carver is. Then you know his logistics business is not primarily about logistics. Why was Edmund meeting with him? I don't know yet. But the timing. Marcus stopped. Dorian, the timing of that meeting and the timing of him coming to us with the arrangement, it's 4 days apart. Dorian sat with that. 4 days. Edmund Vale meets with Renwick Carver, a man whose port operations were the worst-kept secret in Blackridge's Underworld. And then 4 days later, he brings his daughter's name to the table as collateral. He wasn't just paying off gambling debts, Dorian said. No, Marcus said. I don't think he was. Dorian hung up. He sat at the desk for another minute. Then he turned off the lamp and sat in the dark because sometimes the dark was better for thinking. No visual input, just the city light bleeding through the curtains and the hum of the tower's systems, and the specific silence of a space 42 floors above the ground where nothing reached you unless you let it. He sat in the dark and thought about a photograph taken inside the Vale residence 11 years ago. He thought about a woman in a gray shirt sitting on a hallway floor, knees drawn to her chest, saying, "I'm fine," before he'd asked. He thought about Renwick Carver. He went to bed and slept exactly 4 hours and woke at 3:40 with the specific clarity he always woke with. Immediate, no transition, 1 second asleep, and the next second already moving, and lay in the dark ceiling and made decisions. In the morning, she was in the kitchen again, same position as the day before, standing at the window with her coffee, looking out at the city. She'd changed from yesterday's gray shirt to a dark blue one, same style, same length, same button-to-the-throat architecture. He was beginning to understand the logic of it. He poured coffee. She didn't look at him. "I want to go out today," she said. He set his cup on the counter. "Okay." She turned then. "That's it? Just okay?" "Did you expect a different answer?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. She was trying to find the angle on it. The condition attached, the cost. He recognized the calculation because he did it himself, reflexively, with every piece of information anyone gave him. What does this cost? What does this require? What happens if I take it? "Most people expect something in return," she said. "I'm not most people," he said. "Where do you want to go?" She looked at him for another moment. Something in her face moved. Not warmth, not yet, but the recalibration of a threat assessment. "I'd like to see my friend. She lives in the Crestwood district. I haven't been allowed." She stopped, reframed it. "I haven't seen her in about 8 months." He drank his coffee. "I'll have a car arranged, 2 of my people with you." "They won't be visible," he said. "They'll stay half a block back. You won't know they're there unless something happens, and if something happens, you'll be glad they are." He looked at her. "That's the arrangement. It's not negotiable." Her jaw tightened. That defiance again. The bone-deep kind. But she nodded. Once. Sharp. "Fine." He arranged the car through a call that lasted 45 seconds and then went to his study and did not watch from the window as she left the building. He told himself he did not watch and then stood at the edge of the window for 6 seconds before pulling himself back to his desk. He had work. He had a foundation to excavate. Marcus arrived at 11 with 2 secured laptops and the expression of a man who has been awake since 4 a.m. and has found things he wishes he hadn't. He set the laptops on the study table and sat across from Dorian, and for a moment just looked at his own hands. "Tell me," Dorian said. "The Harrow Foundation," Marcus said. "On the surface, it's exactly what it presents. Charitable, healthcare, youth services. 12 years of operation, clean audits, good press." He opened the first laptop. Underneath the surface is a different architecture entirely. The foundation serves as a clearinghouse, not for money, primarily, though money moves through it, for information, for documentation, for the arrangement of movements of individuals across a network of affiliated businesses. He looked up. And 3 of those businesses have Renwick Carver's fingerprints on them. Dorian looked at the screen. Shell companies, logistics subcontractors, residential facilities listed as transitional housing. "How many people?" he said. "I can't give you a number yet. But the network is not small. It has been operating, as far as I can trace, for at least 12 years. Marcus pressed a key. A new document came up, a list of names. These are the Foundation's board members, current and historical. Dorian scanned the list. 3 city council members, a federal district magistrate, 2 names from the Blackridge Metropolitan Police Executive, and at the bottom of the historical list, removed from the board 4 years ago with no public explanation, one name he hadn't expected, Edmund Vale. He read it twice to make sure. He was on the board, Dorian said. For 6 years, Marcus said. He wasn't peripheral. He was operational. He was one of the people who built the documentation system, the private record management infrastructure I used to access Serafina's files. He built the system that buried her records inside it. Marcus's voice had gone very flat. He created the infrastructure that hid what was being done to his own daughter while simultaneously using that same infrastructure for the Foundation's broader operations. The room was quiet for a long time. Dorian looked at the list, looked at Edmund Vale's name, thought about the photograph on his phone. Why was he removed 4 years ago? He said. I don't know yet, but 4 years ago is also when Serafina's medical records stop. She stopped going to doctors. Whatever changed 4 years ago, it affected both things. She was 20, Dorian said. She turned 20 4 years ago. Marcus nodded slowly. Old enough to make certain choices about who she would and wouldn't allow near her. Old enough to create a perimeter, even a small one. Dorian thought about her sitting on the hallway floor. Thought about, I'm fine. Automatic, preemptive. Thought about 8 months without seeing a friend. Edmund isn't just a man with debts, Dorian said. No. Marcus closed the laptop. He is a man who created and operated infrastructure for moving human beings across this city and possibly beyond it, who was pushed out of that operation 4 years ago. I suspect because he became a liability, his financial problems drawing attention, and who has spent the intervening years deteriorating financially while the people he worked with remained insulated. A pause. And he resolved his debt problem by bringing his daughter to the table, who is the only person alive who has direct personal knowledge of what he built, and whom he spent 2 decades ensuring would never speak. Dorian was very still. He didn't sell her to pay his debts, Dorian said. Not primarily. No, Marcus said. I think he sold her to someone he believed would keep her contained, inaccessible, and possibly… Marcus stopped. Say it. Possibly to someone he thought he could leverage. If the arrangement went wrong and Carver's people came for him again, having the Voss name in the family might have looked like insurance. Marcus looked at him directly. He was using you too, Dorian. He thought he was buying himself protection from 2 directions at once. The anger was there. He recognized it, a specific low heat that he had learned to manage over years, to keep below the surface where it was useful rather than letting it run hot, where it became imprecise. He managed it now. He kept his face completely still. Get me everything on Carver's current operations, Dorian said. Physical locations, personnel, supply chain. He stood. And Marcus, don't talk to Edmund Vale. Don't let anyone in our structure contact him. He doesn't know what we know. Understood. Marcus stood too. He hesitated at the door. Dorian, does she know any of it? Does she understand the scope of what her father was involved in? Dorian thought about her watching the city from the window, thought about the way she'd said I haven't been allowed, and then caught herself and reframed it. I don't know, he said. Not yet. Marcus left. Dorian stood at the window and looked out at Blackridge, his city, his weight, the empire he'd built, and the one he'd inherited, and all the dark matter connecting the two, and felt the specific feeling of a situation that has passed the point where management is the correct response. She came back at 3 p.m. He heard the elevator, heard the door, heard her footsteps cross the entry hall, and stop when she found him in the living room instead of the study. He was sitting on the couch with one of Marcus's reports in his hand, not reading it, looking at it. How was she? He said. Fine. A pause. She's good. She's… Another pause. She asked me a lot of questions I didn't have good answers to. About me. About everything. She didn't sit. She stood near the window, always near the window, and looked at him with an expression that had something new in it, something that was trying to be neutral and not quite getting there. She said there are things people are saying about this arrangement, about you. There are always things people say. She said the story going around is that you collected me. Her voice was level. Like a dead instrument. That you took me because my father offered you something worth taking, and you're the kind of man who takes things. He looked at her. What do you think? I think... She stopped, started again. I think you've been more decent to me in 4 days than my father was in 24 years, and I don't know what to do with that information. The room was quiet. Outside, the late afternoon light had gone to gold over the city. That's a low bar, he said. I know, she said. He looked back at the report in his hands. Your friend is safe? No problems. No problems. She hesitated. Your people. The two who followed me. They were good. I genuinely didn't know they were there until the one with the gray jacket held a door open for me outside a coffee shop, and I recognized the earpiece. I'll tell them to be better. Something crossed her face that was almost a laugh. Almost. It didn't make it all the way. Don't. It was... Actually, that was fine. It was fine that they were there. She said it like it surprised her. Like the idea of protection being something other than a threat was a concept she was still building the vocabulary for. He said nothing. Let it sit. She went to the kitchen and he heard her moving around in there, opening cabinets, the sound of a pan. After a few minutes, the smell of something cooking came through the apartment. Simple, something with garlic and olive oil, not elaborate. He sat in the living room and looked at his report and did not allow himself to feel anything about the fact that she was cooking in his kitchen because she'd chosen to rather than because anyone had required it. He went to his study and called a man named Birch, who ran physical intelligence for the Voss operation. Boots on the ground, eyes on locations. He gave Birch 3 addresses from Marcus's report, addresses connected to Carver's logistics network, and told him to conduct discreet observation only. No contact, no action. He needed a picture of current operational status. Birch said he could have preliminary information by morning. Dorian hung up and sat at his desk and rubbed his face with both hands. One of the only physical gestures he allowed himself in private that he would never allow himself in public, and thought about the shape of what he was building toward. Because he could see it now. He could see the architecture of it. Edmund Vale and Renwick Carver, and the Harrow Foundation, and 12 years of infrastructure, buried under charitable work and political connections. He could see how far it ran. He could see that the edges of it touched things in this city that would not be dislodged without violence, without cost, without the kind of war that couldn't be managed quietly. He could also see that Serafina, standing in the kitchen 40 feet away making food she hadn't been asked to make, breathing controlled air into controlled lungs, was sitting in the center of it. Had been sitting in the center of it for 24 years, had been made to sit there by the man who was supposed to keep her safe. He thought about what Marcus had said, the only person alive who has direct personal knowledge. She didn't know, or she didn't know the full scope of it. She knew what had happened to her. She did not know what the structure around that was, what her father had been building while it was happening. He had to tell her. He did not know how to do that. He had no practice in this kind of conversation. He had conversations about contracts, about power, about threat, and leverage and resource. He did not have the specific conversation that begins, your father was not only a man who hurt you, but a man who built systems for hurting many people, and you are the evidence at the center of those systems. He did not have that conversation yet. He went back to the living room, and she had set food on the counter. 2 plates, pasta, simple, and was sitting on one of the stools eating with efficient, focused attention, the way people eat when they haven't eaten properly in a while. She looked up when he came in. I didn't know if you'd... It's there if you want it, she said. He sat at the counter. He ate. They didn't talk while they ate. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the particular silence of 2 people who have individually spent years operating in silence and have found, without discussing it, that the other person's presence inside that silence is not unwelcome. He ate all of it. She noticed that he ate all of it. He noticed her noticing. You can paint, he said, if you want. There's a room on the north side, and it gets afternoon light. I use it for nothing." She went very still. "I haven't painted in—" "I know," he said. "The supplies are there if you want them. I had them brought up yesterday." She looked at him for a long time. He kept eating. He felt the weight of her looking at him and did not respond to it, and did not turn away from it and let her do whatever internal accounting she needed to do. "Why?" she said finally. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Because you used to do something," he said, "and then you stopped. And I don't see why you should have to keep stopping." He finished eating and took his plate to the sink and left her there with her fork in her hand and an expression on her face that he did not look at directly because some things are private even when they happen in the same room. He was in the study when Birch called at 9 that evening. He had been half expecting routine, logistics observation, count of vehicles, personnel patterns. Instead, Birch's voice came through tight and careful, the way his people sounded when they were reporting something they'd been trained not to let rattle them, but which was rattling them anyway. "The first 2 addresses are active," Birch said. "Warehouses. Southport, both of them. There are people in them, Dorian. Not workers. Not logistics workers." Dorian didn't move. "How many?" "At least 30 at the first site. Could be more. The conditions aren't. It's not a logistics operation." "I understand," Dorian said very quietly. "There's more," Birch said. "The 3rd address. The residential facility. I ran a records check on the property before I went to observe. It's listed under a subsidiary of the Harrow Foundation." A pause. "The Foundation's director of operations. A man named Ellison Greer. He was there tonight. At the 3rd address. He left in a car registered to a holding company that traces back through 3 layers to Renwick Carver. And Carver himself. No Carver tonight, but Dorian—" Birch stopped. "There was another car there coming out as I arrived. Black. Private plates." A pause. "I ran the plates. The car is registered to Edmund Vale." The room went completely quiet. Edmund Vale. At a Harrow Foundation facility tonight, connected to Carver, while his daughter sat 42 floors above the city in Dorian's penthouse. Dorian's hand was flat on the desk again. He was aware of it. "Birch," he said, "stay on the 3rd address. Don't move. Don't be seen. I need to know if Carver's people make contact with Vale tonight. And if they do?" "Don't intervene," he said. "Not yet. I need to know what they're discussing first." He hung up. Sat in the dark of the study for 30 seconds. Then stood and walked to the door of the study and opened it. She was in the hallway. She had clearly been walking toward the north room, toward the art supplies, he realized, the paints he'd had brought up, trying it out in the evening after all. And she had stopped when the study door opened and was looking at him now with that careful, calibrated attention she gave everything. He looked at her face. He thought about what Marcus had told him, about the files, about the photograph, about Edmund Vale's name on a board of directors for 12 years, and his car parked outside a facility tonight, and Birch's voice tight on the phone saying, "The conditions aren't. It's not a logistics operation." He thought about the only person alive who has direct personal knowledge. He thought, she needs to know, not everything, not tonight, but enough. "Serafina," he said. His voice came out level, controlled, the way it always did. "There's something I need to talk to you about." She read his face. He was good at not showing things. She was apparently better at reading them than most. He watched her expression shift as she did it. Watched the armor that had been fractionally, incrementally lowering over 4 days slide back into position with the precise efficiency of someone who has spent their whole life putting it back quickly. "About my father," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, straight-backed, hands in her lap, chin level, and looked at him as he came through the door, and her eyes were very dark and very still, and she said, "Tell me what you found." He sat across from her. He looked at her face. He opened his mouth to begin the carefully ordered sequence of information he'd been mentally organizing for the last 40 minutes. The version that built gradually, that scaffolded the worst parts with context. His phone buzzed. Birch. A text, not a call. 3 words and a photograph. He looked at the photograph. His blood went cold. Because the photograph Birch had just sent was not of Edmund Vale's car. It was not of Carver's people, or the facility, or the Southport warehouses. It was taken from distance, slightly blurred, the kind of rushed photograph a man takes when he needs to document something fast and clean and get clear of the area before anyone looks his direction. It was a photograph of 2 men standing outside the Voss Tower, looking up, and one of the 2 men was someone Dorian recognized. Not Carver, not Edmund Vale. Someone worse. Someone Dorian had not seen in 4 years, had believed to be operating out of the country, had arranged to be operating out of the country through a set of agreements that had cost him considerably and had apparently not held. He looked up from the phone and met Serafina's eyes. "Are we safe here?" she said. She had read something in his face again, something he hadn't meant to show. He looked at the photograph, looked at her, made a decision in the space of he made the decision in 1 second flat. "Get your coat," he said. Serafina didn't move immediately. She was reading his face again, doing that precise, rapid calculation she did. Threat level, direction of threat, available options. And he could see the moment she finished it because her body shifted from seated stillness into readiness without her standing up yet, weight forward, hands off her lap. "How bad?" she said. "Coat. Now. Everything else while we move." She stood and went to her room, and he was already on the phone to Birch before she cleared the doorway. "The 2 men outside the tower, are they still there?" "One is. The other went east on Caldwell 3 minutes ago." "The one who stayed, does he have eyes on the entrance or the building face?" "Building face. He's looking up." Which meant he was looking for lit windows, counting floors, doing the same geography mapping that Dorian did in every room he entered, except from the outside looking in. "Get me a car. Not the building garage. The service access on the Mercer side. 2 minutes." "Done." He hung up and went to the safe in the study wall. Entered the combination with hands that were completely steady because he had made a decision, and decisions, once made, produce their own clarity. He took the firearm he kept there, Tio, a compact .45, already loaded, safety on, and put it inside his jacket. He took the secondary phone, the one that ran on a different network through a different routing system, and put it in his other pocket. Serafina was in the hallway when he came out of the study. She had her coat. She had also, he noted, put on shoes that laced, not the slip-ons she'd been wearing around the apartment. She had understood we're moving fast without being told. "Who is he?" she said. "The man in the photograph." He looked at her for 1 second. "His name is Aldrich Vane. He runs enforcement operations for a consortium that operates alongside and sometimes against Carver's network. I had an agreement with him. He was supposed to be in Eastern Europe." "Supposed to be." "Yes. And the agreement is apparently no longer in effect." He moved toward the service stairs rather than the elevator. Elevators were boxes, and boxes were traps. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I ask you something directly." She fell into step beside him without argument. He noted that too. The service stairs were concrete and fluorescent lit and smelled like cleaning chemicals and the specific damp of a building's functional interior. Their footsteps were the only sound. 38 floors of stairs wasn't the plan. The service exit he wanted was on the 4th floor, connecting to the Merserside alley through a loading corridor. He'd mapped it years ago, the way he'd mapped every building he'd occupied longer than a month. "You always know where the other doors are." She kept pace exactly, not struggling, not theatrical about it. She moved like someone who had learned to be quiet and quick as a matter of survival, not training. At the 4th floor landing, he stopped, listened. Nothing. He pushed through the door into the loading corridor. Bare concrete, metal shelving, the distant diesel smell of the service entrance, and moved fast toward the exterior door. The car was there. Birch's man at the wheel, engine running, a dark sedan that was registered to a cleaning company and unremarkable in every visible way. Dorian opened the rear door for Serafina and came in behind her, and the car was moving before he'd pulled the door shut. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere they don't know about." He looked out the rear window. Nothing following. Yet. "There's a property in the Millhaven district. It's not in my name or any name connected to me. Marcus has the address." He texted Marcus on the secondary phone. 3 words. Millhaven. Moving now. Marcus responded in under a minute. Understood. I'll meet you. Don't use your primary phone. He looked at his primary phone, then turned it off and put it in the door pocket of the car. If they had his number, and Vane's people would have his number. The primary phone was a beacon. Serafina was watching him do this. He could feel her watching him. She hadn't asked again about Vane. She was holding her questions with the same tight, deliberate control she held everything. And he recognized that control for what it was now. Not composure, but the behavior of someone who had learned very early that asking the wrong question at the wrong moment had consequences. You can ask, he said, not looking at her, looking out the window as the car moved through Blackridge's night-wet streets. A pause. Does this have to do with my father? Yes. How bad is it? He looked at her then. Her face in the passing streetlights was very still. The specific stillness of someone who has prepared themselves to receive information that is going to hurt and has done the preparation so many times it looks like calm. I don't know yet how bad the full picture is, he said. But I know that whatever your father was involved with, it's larger than his private behavior. And I know that Aldrich Vane's presence outside my building tonight is not a coincidence. She held his gaze. He was going to sell me to them, she said. Wasn't he? That's what the meeting with Carver was. That's what the arrangement was supposed to be before he came to you. Dorian was quiet for a moment. What makes you say that? Because 4 years ago he tried to do it the first time. Her voice was completely flat. I was 20. A man came to the house. I didn't know who he was. My father introduced him as a business associate. The man looked at me the way you look at property you're assessing. Her hands were in her lap, not fists, open, like she'd made a choice to keep them open. I left that night. I stayed with my friend, the one in Crestwood, for 3 months. My father found me and brought me back and told me that if I left again, he would make sure I had nowhere to go, that he would ensure my friend's family faced consequences. A pause. I believed him. So I stayed. Dorian looked at her hands. Open. He thought about what that cost. To keep your hands open when your whole history was pressing them closed. You knew, he said. I knew something, not the scale of it. She looked out the window. I knew he was connected to people who did terrible things. I didn't know how many people. I didn't know what the structure was. A beat. But I knew when he brought me to you, it wasn't just about debt. Men like my father don't let things go that easily. There was something else he was trying to manage. The car turned onto the Millhaven access road. Quieter here, industrial. The kind of neighborhood that had been commercial once and now existed in the specific limbo of abandonment that cities accumulate over decades. The property was a converted warehouse, the front of it presenting as a storage facility. Dorian had acquired it through a 3-layer holding structure 2 years ago because sometimes you needed a room with no history. Inside, Marcus was already there. He had set up on a folding table, 2 laptops, a secured router, a pot of coffee from a gas station that smelled like it had been made sometime yesterday. He looked up when they came in, and his expression when he saw Serafina was careful and neutral in the way that meant he was actively choosing it. We have a problem, Marcus said. Multiple problems, Dorian said. Sequence them. Vane first. Marcus pulled up a screen. Aldrich Vane arrived in Blackridge 48 hours ago. He didn't come through the main airport. He came through Relling County Airstrip, which is outside our monitoring footprint. Someone helped him get in clean. He looked at Dorian. Someone who knew our monitoring footprint. Dorian went still. Inside. It has to be. The Relling Airstrip isn't a known resource. It's used maybe 4 times a year by our people for specific operations. The list of people who know it exists is short. How short? 6 people, including myself. Marcus's voice didn't change. I've already begun verifying the other 5. I'll have something in the next few hours. All right. Dorian pulled a chair from against the wall and set it near the table. He looked at Serafina. Sit. Not a command. More like a reminder that sitting was a choice available to her. She sat. Vane and Carver, Dorian said. Are they working together, or is Vane independent? From what I can reconstruct tonight, together. Or more precisely, Vane is here on Carver's request. The consortium Vane runs enforcement for has a financial relationship with the Harrow Foundation. They're not competing structures. They're interconnected. Marcus looked at his screen. And here's where it gets worse. Go. I've been running the documentation trail on the Harrow Foundation's operations. The physical sites, the personnel movements, the logistics. Birch sent me everything he observed tonight. Marcus pulled up a second window. There are 7 active sites connected to the Foundation's operational network within Blackridge. I had identified 3 of them. The other 4 I found in the last 2 hours. He looked up. One of those 4 is a building in the Harrow district itself, a medical facility that presents as a private rehabilitation center. And it isn't. It's where they keep the documentation, all of it. Physical records, server infrastructure, the original filing system that Edmund Vale built 12 years ago. A pause. And Dorian? It's also where they keep the people they need to keep quiet. Long term. He said the last 2 words with the specific flatness of someone choosing clinical distance because the alternative is worse. It's not just a records facility. It functions as a holding location. Serafina made a sound. Not words, just a small involuntary exhale, like something had hit her in the chest. She pressed it back immediately. Her hand stayed open in her lap. Dorian looked at her. Did you know about a facility in the Harrow district? There was a place my father mentioned once, she said. Her voice was very controlled. He called it the Harrow Clinic. He said it was where people went when they needed to disappear from their own lives for a while. A beat. He said it as a warning. The room was quiet. When? Dorian said. 4 years ago, after I came back from my friends. He said... She stopped. Her jaw moved once. He said there were places in this city where a person could be made very comfortable and very invisible and never need to worry about the outside world again. He said some people found that preferable. She looked at her hands. He was telling me what would happen if I tried to leave again. Dorian turned to Marcus. The facility is operational right now. Yes, and Vane's presence here is connected to the facility. I believe Vane is here because something has shifted in the network's internal stability. Carver's operation has been showing fracture lines for the past 6 months. I can see it in the financial movements. Someone inside the foundation has been skimming. Someone has been moving records. There may be a source somewhere inside the structure who has been quietly documenting things, building a case. Marcus's expression shifted slightly. And when that kind of instability happens in an organization like this, they do one of 2 things. They clean house, eliminate the fracture points, or they consolidate assets and move them somewhere safer. They're planning to move, Dorian said. I think they may already be moving. Tonight. The activity Birch observed at the Southport warehouses, personnel movement, loading. It didn't look like routine operations. Marcus looked at him directly. If they move those people out of Blackridge before we have the evidence to stop them, we lose the only thing that can bring the network down through legitimate channels. And if they think you're a threat, they'll come for me directly. Dorian looked at the wall. And for anything connected to me, he looked at Serafina. She met his gaze. I'm not afraid of them, she said. Her voice came out even, which he recognized cost her something, and then the next line came out slightly less even, slightly more honest. I'm afraid of how many people they're going to hurt if they get to move everything out of the city. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the files on his phone, the photograph from 11 years ago. He thought about her at 20, sitting across from a man who looked at her like property, and then walking out in the middle of the night with nowhere to go and going anyway. He made a decision. Marcus, he said, the source inside the foundation, the one who's been moving records. Can you find them? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I've been trying. There are traces, things that suggest someone with internal access has been making copies of documentation over a period of months. Carefully. Small amounts at a time, but I haven't been able to identify. It's Ellison Greer, Serafina said. Both men looked at her. She looked back at them with an expression that was partly, I've been waiting for the right moment, and partly something rawer than that. Something that had been held a long time and was finally coming out into air. The Foundation's Director of Operations, Greer. He came to the Vale House once, about 18 months ago. My father didn't know I was home. I was supposed to be out, but I'd come back early. I heard them arguing. My father was trying to pressure Greer about something. Leverage, money. I didn't hear everything. Her hands were still in her lap, still open. But Greer said one thing clearly enough that I heard it through the door. He said, "I have been documenting everything, Edmund. Everything. And if you push me, it will not be your enemies who destroy you. It will be the record." Marcus turned immediately to his laptop. Dorian watched Seraphina's face. "Why didn't you say that earlier?" "Because earlier I didn't know what it meant," she said. "Now I do." Dorian looked at Marcus. "Find Greer, tonight. If he's been building a case, he's in danger right now. If Vane is here to consolidate and clean house, Greer is at the top of the list." He was already moving, pulling on his jacket, thinking through the sequence. "And I need to know where Edmund Vale is. Right now, tonight, where is he physically?" Marcus's hands were moving across the keyboard. He stopped. He made a sound that wasn't a word, a short intake of breath that was the closest Marcus came to an audible reaction, and Dorian turned immediately because Marcus Hale did not make sounds like that. "What?" Dorian said. "I'm in Greer's system," Marcus said. His voice had gone to that flat, careful place again. "He has been building a case. He's been compiling records for 7 months. He created a secured archive, financial documentation, movement records, correspondence." His eyes moved across the screen. "It's extensive, Dorian. It's genuinely extensive. Names, dates, transactions. If this went to the right people..." "Marcus." "The archive has been accessed," Marcus said. "Tonight, 40 minutes ago, from an external IP. Someone got into his system while we were in transit here." He looked up. "They've seen everything he compiled, and there's a deletion flag, automated, attached to the breach event. The physical documentation he was keeping off-site." He stopped. "There's an address attached to the flag, a storage location in the Crestwood district." Crestwood. Dorian turned and looked at Seraphina. Her face had gone the color of old ash. "My friend," she said. "She lives in Crestwood. The storage location..." Marcus started. "What street?" Seraphina said. Her voice was different now. The control was still there, but something underneath it had cracked, like ice taking weight. Marcus read the address. She closed her eyes. 1 second. 2. When she opened them, they were very bright and very hard, and she stood up from the chair and said in a voice that didn't shake because she had chosen for it not to shake, "That's Nadia's building." The silence in the warehouse lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Dorian said, "Marcus, get Birch to Crestwood. Now, that address. Tell him protective priority. Move fast." He was already at the door. He looked back at Seraphina. "You stay here." "That is not..." "Listen to me." He turned fully and looked at her and spoke in a voice that was not raised, was not harsh, but had the specific weight of absolute certainty in it. "If you come with me and something happens to you at that location, I cannot do what needs to be done. I will be managing 2 things, and I cannot manage 2 things in a live situation. You're safer here than anywhere I'm going right now." A beat. "And I need you to be okay. Do you understand me?" She looked at him, that dark-eyed, bone-deep defiance, but also something that heard what he'd said underneath the strategy. "I need you to be okay. Not as an asset, not as a variable." She sat back down. "Go," she said. He went. The drive to Crestwood took 11 minutes. Dorian spent 8 of them on the secondary phone with Birch, getting real-time positioning. Birch's team was 2 minutes ahead of him. The storage building on the target street was a 3-story converted townhouse. The ground floor an actual legitimate storage unit business. The upper floors residential. Nadia, he didn't have a last name yet, Marcus was pulling it, lived on the 2nd floor. "Activity at the location?" Dorian said. "1 vehicle parked on the east side," Birch said. "Dark. Plates come back to a rental registered 2 days ago through a company I don't recognize. My people are on foot approaching from the north. Hold it perimeter. Don't move on the building until I'm there." "Understood." He arrived on foot from a block south, moving through an alley that ran behind the residential buildings. His jacket closed, the .45 accessible. The air smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. That specific pressure in the air, that electricity before weather. The alley was empty. The lights in the Crestwood residential buildings were mostly dark, 11:30 on a weeknight. Birch found him at the alley entrance. Ex-military, compact, a man who said approximately 40 words per day and made each one count. He pointed at the townhouse. Ground floor lights on, second floor, one window, east side, light on and off. Like someone moving with a flashlight. Not the resident, then. The resident would use the ceiling light. Flashlight meant someone who didn't want to be seen from outside. How many inside? Dorian said. Unknown. Vehicle outside holds 2, maybe 3. I don't know if they're all inside. Birch looked at him. I have 3 people. We can go in clean. The resident, the woman who lives on the second floor. Where is she? We don't know. Dorian looked at the building. Thought about Serafina at the warehouse saying that's Nadia's building in the voice of someone watching something they'd caused. We go in, Dorian said. Non-lethal if possible. I need someone to talk to. They went in. The ground floor was empty. Legitimate storage units along a corridor, padlocked, undisturbed. A staircase at the back. Dorian took it with Birch behind him, the other 2 Birch operatives covering the front entrance and exterior. The second floor hallway was dark. 1 door on the left, 1 on the right. The east side apartment, right, had a line of faint moving light under the door, just like Birch had said. Not a ceiling light. Something handheld. Dorian tried the door handle. Unlocked. They'd been inside long enough to disable or bypass the lock, or she hadn't locked it in the first place. He went in fast and low, and Birch came in behind him, and there were 2 men in the apartment, one near the bedroom door, one crouched over an open storage box near the window. And neither of them was prepared for an entry because they were focused on what they were looking for, not who might come through the door. The one near the bedroom raised a weapon, but Birch was faster and better, and the man went down in a controlled takedown that was loud but not lethal. The one at the box lunged for the window and got 2 steps before Dorian had him by the collar and slammed him against the wall hard enough that the framed print above the storage box fell to the floor. Where is she? Dorian said. The woman who lives here. The resident. The man, young, maybe 25, with the specific look of someone who has done this kind of work long enough to know not to answer questions, said nothing. Dorian pressed him against the wall with one forearm across his chest. I'll ask once more. Nothing. Birch, Dorian said. Birch applied the kind of focused pressure to the man's right shoulder that produces immediate compliance without permanent damage. The man made a sound. Where is she? Dorian said again. Car, the man said through clenched teeth. Outside. She's in the car. She's not hurt. Yet, Dorian said. She's not hurt yet. That's what you mean. He looked at Birch. Get her out of the vehicle. Birch went. Dorian kept the man against the wall and looked at the open storage box on the floor. Physical files, actual paper documents, the kind that don't exist in digital systems and can't be remotely deleted. Greer's physical documentation. The archive Marcus had identified. Carver sent you, Dorian said. The man's eyes moved. Enough. Vane, Dorian said. Vane sent you. Smaller movement. Harder to read. Maybe both. Maybe the answer was that the distinction didn't matter at this level of the operation. These men were sent. They didn't ask by whom. What were you supposed to do with the files? Dorian said. Retrieve and destroy. And the woman? Nothing. Dorian looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back. He did not release the man. Birch's other operative had come up from the ground floor and was handling custody now. He turned and looked at the open storage box. Files. Months of Greer's documentation. Real evidence, the kind that could be placed in front of the right people and cause the kind of damage to Carver's network and the Harrow Foundation that Dorian's own enforcement operations could never publicly accomplish. He took out his phone and called Marcus. I have Greer's files, physical, intact. Thank God, Marcus said. Then, Dorian, something's happening. I've been watching the communication traffic around Carver's network for the last 20 minutes. His voice had shifted. There's a mobilization. Something triggered it. A signal went out 45 minutes ago. I think it was triggered when Vane's people breached Greer's digital archive. It was an automated response, and the Southport locations are moving, all of them. Dorian looked at the storage box. Moving where? I don't know yet, but there are 3 vessels registered to Carver's logistics company currently docked at the Southport. If they load and move tonight, they vanish, Dorian said. Everything vanishes. Yes. He thought about 30 people in a warehouse. Birch's voice on the phone saying the conditions aren't, it's not a logistics operation. He thought about 7 active sites. He thought about the Harrow Clinic and the people inside it who had been made comfortable and invisible. He thought about Serafina at the warehouse, hands open in her lap. He thought about the photograph on his phone from 11 years ago. I need Greer, Dorian said. Where is he right now? That's the other thing, Marcus said, and his voice had gone to that place again. That careful, flat place. I found Greer 20 minutes ago. He's at the Harrow Clinic. He went there tonight. I think he was trying to remove people himself, independently. He walked into the facility voluntarily. A pause that had weight in it. He hasn't come back out. That was 2 hours ago. Dorian stood in the dark apartment in Crestwood, with the files at his feet, and felt the situation crystallize into its final shape. The shape where there were no more careful moves, no more information gathering, no more controlled management of incremental steps. The shape where everything that was going to happen in the next few hours, whether he chose it or not, and the only question left was what shape he chose to give it. He thought about the deals he had made over 8 years, the ones that required him to look at terrible things and calculate whether the cost of addressing them exceeded the cost of leaving them alone. He thought about how many times he had made that calculation and come out on the wrong side. He looked at the files. He looked at his phone, thought about Serafina at the warehouse, sitting straight-backed in a chair, hands open. He called Marcus back. Get me everything on the Southport, access points, vessel positions, security configurations. Get Birch's full team moving, and get me a line to Harlow. Harlow was a federal contact. Not law enforcement, not exactly. A man who existed in the specific space between official and unofficial that sometimes produced the only useful action available. Tell him I have documentation that will be delivered to his office in the morning. Physical, verified, chain of custody clean. Tell him in exchange I need the Southport blocked. Tonight. And tell him if he asks me where this documentation came from, I'll tell him I found it on the street. Marcus was quiet for 1 second. If you do this, Dorian, if you go to the port tonight, Vane will know it was you. Carver will know. Every agreement you've maintained with those structures ends tonight, all of them. I know, Dorian said. This is not a recoverable position, Marcus said. You understand that. This is not something you manage down afterward. This is... I know what it is, Marcus. A pause. All right, Marcus said. I'll get Harlow. Dorian hung up. He looked at Birch's operative and at the man still held against the wall and at the storage box of Greer's files, and made the fast, sequential set of practical decisions that needed to be made right now. The files with Birch's second operative to a location Marcus would identify. The man against the wall, processed through a method that didn't involve police because police in this city were complicated, but secured and held. Birch himself coordinating the port operation. Then he called the warehouse on the secondary phone. She picked up on the first ring. What happened? She said. No preamble. Nadia is safe. She's here. She's unharmed. He heard the breath on the other end of the line, that careful, controlled exhale. I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm listening. I'm about to do something tonight that will change the operational landscape of this city in a way that cannot be undone. It will make certain powerful people very aware of me as an enemy in a way they haven't been before. A pause. It will also make you safer than you are right now, but I want you to understand the shape of it before it happens. Silence on the line, then, you're going to the port. He looked out the apartment window at the Crestwood street, wet from the rain that had finally started again, lamplight bleeding gold across the pavement. Yes, he said. Greer is inside the Harrow Clinic, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd heard enough of his conversation with Marcus. Yes. Then you can't go to the port first, she said. Her voice was precise and completely even. If they're mobilizing to move, and Greer is already inside the clinic, and Vane's people are active, they'll know if you hit the port first. They'll have time to deal with Greer before you can get to the clinic. A pause. You have to go to the clinic first. He was quiet for a moment. She was right. He'd known she was right, had been running the same sequence and arriving at the same problem. But hearing it from her, hearing the clarity of it, confirmed what he'd already decided, and also confirmed something else about her that he was still building vocabulary for. Yes, he said, the clinic first. I'm coming, she said. Serafina? He knows my face, she said. Greer. He came to the Vale house. If Greer is inside that facility and doesn't know if he can trust the person coming to get him, if he's scared and cornered and doesn't know your face from Vane's people, he might not come out willingly, but he knows my face. Her voice didn't waver. I'm the fastest way to get him out. He stood in the dark apartment in Crestwood with rain starting against the windows, and thought about the photograph on his phone from when she was 11, and thought about a woman who had spent 24 years learning to survive, and thought about what she'd said 4 days ago in the kitchen. I don't know what to do with that information. This was what she did with it. The car is coming back for you, he said. 4 minutes. I'll be outside, she said. He hung up. He stood in the wet dark of the Crestwood night and looked at the city. His city, the one he had built and managed and controlled for 8 years, and felt it shift under him into something different. Something that didn't have a clean shape yet. That was, the car came back in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Dorian was already moving south on foot when it found him, sliding through a gap between 2 parked vehicles to match his pace before he opened the rear door and got in. Serafina was already inside. She'd been outside the warehouse before the car reached her, standing in the rain without an umbrella, her coat dark with water across the shoulders, her face dry because she'd kept her chin up. She looked at him when he got in. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. The car moved. Birch was in the front passenger seat. He turned and handed Dorian a secondary earpiece and a folded sheet of paper. Hand-drawn, the Harrow Clinic's exterior layout from a satellite image printed and annotated with what Birch's preliminary observation had produced in the last 40 minutes. 1 main entrance, a secondary staff entrance on the west side, a loading bay at the rear that connected to a service corridor, 2 visible personnel at the main entrance, civilian clothes, but the specific posture of armed men dressed to look like they weren't. How many inside? Dorian said. Unknown, could be 4, could be 12. We don't have interior intelligence. Birch's voice was level. What I have. Greer's vehicle is in the rear lot. He drove himself in. That was... He checked his watch. 2 hours, 20 minutes ago. Exits he could have used to leave that we didn't see. None unmonitored, not without walking past the front personnel. So Greer was inside and hadn't come out through any visible exit, which meant either he couldn't or someone had made sure he wouldn't. Serafina was looking at the layout sketch. She'd leaned across without asking to see it, and he'd let her look because she was right. She was the fastest way to get Greer out, and the fastest way to get Greer out required her understanding the geometry of the building they were walking into. The staff entrance, she said. She put her finger on the west side of the sketch. My father brought me here once, 3 years ago. He wanted me to see it. Her jaw tightened. He used the staff entrance. There was a keypad. Code, Dorian said. I don't know it, but my father never typed codes without me seeing the sequence. He wanted me to understand I couldn't get out without knowing things I didn't know. Something moved in her face. Rage, old and careful, the kind that has been composted into fuel. The sequence was 6 digits. He used his right hand. The first digit was in the upper left. Second digit, lower right. After that, I couldn't track it clearly. Birch looked at Dorian. We can bypass a standard keypad in under a minute. Don't bypass it, she said. Both men looked at her. If it registers a bypass attempt, there might be an alarm. There was a panel on the inside of the staff entrance. I saw it through the glass when he was keying in. It looked like a secondary confirmation panel. Dorian looked at her. You memorized that from one visit 3 years ago. I memorize things about rooms I'm afraid of, she said. It's a habit. It wasn't a boast. It was just what it was. He turned to Birch. Bypass nothing. We go in clean. What's your team configuration? 4 including myself, 2 on exterior perimeter. They neutralized the front personnel before we breached the staff entrance, quiet if possible. As quiet as possible. I don't want noise before we're inside. Dorian looked at the sketch. The rear loading bay. Keep one person there. Anyone tries to move Greer out through the back, they stop that movement. And inside? Inside is you and me. He looked at Serafina. And her. Birch didn't visibly react to that, which was why Birch was useful. They left the car 2 blocks north and moved on foot through the rain. The Harrow district was old money turned institutional. Georgian facades, iron fences, the specific silence of neighborhoods where the buildings are large enough to swallow whatever happens inside them. The clinic sat behind a low wall on a corner lot, a Victorian-era building that had been renovated into something that looked tasteful and medical and absolutely nothing like what it functioned as. The sign was small and brass. Harrow Recovery and Wellness. Lights on in 3 ground-floor windows. The rest of the building dark. Birch's 2 exterior operatives moved on the front entrance personnel with the kind of speed and precision that was over before the men outside had time to fully register what was happening. Dorian watched from the shadow of the wall. 30 seconds, start to finish, both men down and secured in the shadow of the entrance alcove. Not dead. Birch was meticulous about that kind of thing. It was one of the reasons Dorian kept him. Staff entrance, west side. The keypad was a 5x3-digit grid. Dorian stood to the side while Serafina stepped up to it. She looked at it for 3 seconds. He watched her face. She was running memory, accessing something she'd filed away 3 years ago in a building she'd been afraid of, pulling it back up with the specific concentration of someone who has learned that everything you notice might someday be the only thing between you and worse. She pressed 6 digits. Her finger movements were careful and committed. No hesitation on any one key, but not reckless either. A pause of 1 second that felt like 10. The panel beside the door showed green. A click. The door released. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. He pushed the door open and went in first, and she followed, and Birch came in behind them, and the door closed with a soft mechanical click at their backs. Inside, a corridor. Institutional white fluorescent lighting on motion sensors. They flickered on as the 3 of them moved down the hall. The smell was antiseptic over something else, something that didn't belong in a medical building, the particular staleness of spaces where air doesn't move because windows don't open. Doors on both sides of the corridor, all closed. At the far end, a junction. One way led toward what Dorian estimated was the building's interior common area, the other toward a staircase going up. Voices from the right. 2 men, quiet, the back and forth of people managing a waiting situation. Dorian held up his hand. They stopped. He listened. The voices were relaxed, not alert, not mobilized. They didn't know anyone had come through the staff entrance yet. He pointed at Birch. Pointed right. Birch nodded and moved that direction, low and fast. And a moment later, the voices stopped with the specific sudden absence of sound that Birch produced when he was handling a situation efficiently. Dorian moved to the junction and checked right. 2 men, neither conscious. He looked at Serafina. She was pale in the fluorescent light, but her breathing was controlled and her eyes were moving, tracking the space around them, doing what she'd always done in rooms she didn't trust. Greer, he said quietly. Where would they put him? She thought for 2 seconds. My father brought me to a room on the 2nd floor. He called it the consultation suite. It was at the back, away from the street-facing windows. She looked at the staircase. If they have him, that's where. They went up. The staircase was carpeted. Some attempt at the clinic aesthetic, the appearance of a wellness facility, which meant their footsteps were absorbed. The 2nd floor corridor was darker than the 1st, only every 3rd light on. The motion sensors not triggered yet. 3 doors on each side. Last door on the right, the back of the building. Dorian moved to it, put his hand on the handle, looked at Serafina. She put herself slightly to the side of the door, in frame if the door opened outward, out of immediate sightline if it opened in. She understood door geometry. He noted this and filed it away and was aware he was still filing things away about her even now, in a dark corridor in a building where things were going wrong, because he had apparently become a person who paid that kind of attention without deciding to. He opened the door. The room was large. A sitting room of some kind, 2 couches, a window with the curtains drawn, a lamp on in the corner throwing warm, useless light, and 3 people inside. Greer he recognized from Marcus's files, 50s, gray-haired, the look of a man who'd spent his career managing the administrative infrastructure of other people's worst decisions, and had recently, perhaps too late, developed a conscience about it. He was sitting on one of the couches. His hands were in his lap and his wrists were zip-tied. The second person was a woman, mid-30s, standing near the curtained window. She reacted fast when the door opened, hand moving toward her jacket. But Birch was through the door right behind Dorian and had her controlled before the hand got where it was going. The third person was Edmund Vale. He was standing near the far wall. He had a drink in his hand, actual glass, amber liquid, and the look of a man who had been waiting comfortably for something to finish. When the door opened, he turned with the expression of someone expecting a report. Then he saw Dorian, and then he saw his daughter come through the door behind him, and his face went through 4 different calculations in approximately 2 seconds before landing on the one he'd decided was most viable, a thin, managed version of surprise. "Dorian," he said. His voice was still social, still functional, the voice of a man who had spent decades talking his way through things. I can explain what this looks like." "Don't," Dorian said. Edmund looked at Serafina. Something in his face shifted. Not guilt, not exactly, but the specific anxiety of a man who has managed a situation for years and is watching his management structure come apart. "Serafina, whatever you've told him, stop talking," she said. Edmund stopped, not because she'd commanded it, because the sound of her voice in this room, quiet, absolute, with nothing left in it that was afraid of him, was apparently a sound he hadn't prepared for. Dorian moved to Greer and crouched down. "Ellison Greer." Greer looked at him with the eyes of a man who has been sitting in a room with Edmund Vale for 2 hours, understanding clearly what that means. "Your Voss." His voice was hoarse. "Yes. He told me you were coming. He said—" Greer looked at Edmund. "He said you were part of it, that you'd been part of the operation from the beginning, that the marriage was a consolidation move, not—" "He lied," Dorian said. "How do I know?" "Because I have your files," Dorian said. "The physical archive from the Crestwood location. It's in the hands of someone who will put it in front of federal authorities in the morning. And because Vane's people went to retrieve those files tonight and they didn't get them." He looked at Greer directly. "And because you built a system that hid a child's injuries for decades inside a data architecture that was supposed to make her disappear, and the only reason I'm in this room instead of the one at the Southport is that I made a choice about which problem to address first." He held Greer's gaze. "So, you can decide what I'm here to do." Greer was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Edmund Vale with an expression that had nothing administrative left in it. Then he looked back at Dorian. "There's a server room in the basement," Greer said. "The primary documentation system. Everything that wasn't in my external archive, all of it is there. Physical servers, backup drives. They haven't moved it yet because moving it requires the access credentials of 2 separate administrators, and one of those administrators is me, and they needed me present and conscious to get them." He looked down at his zip-tied wrists. "That's why I'm still alive." "And the second administrator, Carver's network director, a man named Tallis. He's not in this building." Greer looked up. "He's at the Southport. He's been overseeing the movement from there. The people at the Southport are being moved onto Carver's vessels as we're speaking." "Yes." Greer's voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just for a second. "I tried to get them out earlier. I came here to try. I was too slow." Dorian stood. He looked at Birch. "Southport," Dorian said. Birch nodded once, already on his earpiece. Dorian turned to Edmund Vale. Edmund had been standing near the wall this whole time, drink still in his hand, wearing the carefully assembled expression of a man assessing his position. He was calculating. Dorian could see it, the way he'd seen it all his life in every room he'd ever walked into. The precise arithmetic of men who have never stopped calculating because stopping means facing what the numbers actually add up to. "You don't understand the full picture," Edmund said. "The network has political protection that goes further than anything you can—" I have Greer's documentation, Dorian said. Documentation can be managed. And Harlow. That landed. Edmund's drink hand moved. Just a fraction. Just enough. Harlow is a federal contact. You can't use a federal contact without... Without what? Dorian looked at him. Without it being known that I've used him. Yes. You're right. I know what that costs me. He held Edmund's gaze. I'm paying it. Edmund's expression changed. The calculation finished and the number came out wrong, and for the first time in the conversation, his face showed the thing underneath all the management. A cold, contracting fear. You'll bring attention to your own operations, everything you've built. Some of it, Dorian said. Some of it will have to change, I know that. He looked at Edmund Vale and felt the anger in him, that specific managed heat, and for once made no effort to manage it below the surface. Let it sit right at the surface where Edmund could see it. You brought your daughter to my building as a method of hiding her. You thought I'd keep her inaccessible, and you'd use my name as a buffer between yourself and the people you'd been working with. He took one step toward Edmund. You thought you were buying protection. What you were buying was a problem. Edmund's back touched the wall. Serafina, Dorian said. He didn't turn around. Yes, she said behind him. Her voice was completely level. There's a pair of zip ties in Birch's jacket pocket, right side. A pause. The sound of her moving. Then her footsteps came around to his right side and she was standing next to him, facing her father, a zip tie in her hand, and she was looking at Edmund Vale with the specific expression of someone who has spent a long time deciding what they would say when they finally stood in exactly this position and has arrived at the conclusion that words are insufficient and action will do instead. She handed Dorian the zip tie. He secured Edmund Vale's wrists himself, which was a choice, and Edmund understood it was a choice. It meant Edmund was not a physical threat that required Birch, was not someone Dorian needed tools for, was simply a man whose hands needed to be still while the situation finished itself. Edmund said nothing through this. For perhaps the first time in decades, he found nothing viable to say. They moved. Birch took Edmund. Dorian went with Greer down to the basement, Serafina behind them through a service door that Greer knew the access for, into a low-ceilinged room that smelled like server heat and recycled air. Racks of equipment along two walls. A terminal in the center. Greer sat at it, his wrists freed by Dorian's knife, the zip ties dropping to the floor, and pulled up the documentation system with hands that shook slightly on the keyboard and then steadied. Copy everything, Dorian said. Everything, Greer. All of it. I need a drive. Dorian looked at Serafina. She was already looking around the room, scanning shelves, the kind of instinctive spatial inventory she did in every new space. And she moved to a metal cabinet against the far wall and opened it, pulled out a sealed drive in factory packaging. Held it up. He looked at her. She shrugged with one shoulder. It looked like the right kind of cabinet. He took the drive and handed it to Greer. Greer worked. The copy took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Dorian counted them. The building above them was quiet. Birch's remaining operative on the exterior had reported no incoming movement, but that wouldn't hold. The exterior personnel being down would be noticed eventually. Vane's network would know something had gone wrong at this location. His phone buzzed. Birch's number. He answered. Southport, Birch said. His voice was different. We have a problem. How big? The vessels are prepping to move. One of them is already clear of the dock. It's in the harbor mouth. I need a decision, Dorian. If that vessel gets past the harbor mouth, we have no jurisdiction and no mechanism to stop it. Dorian looked at the progress bar on Greer's copy operation. 60%. Harlow, Dorian said. I called him. He needs 20 minutes to get any kind of authority in place at the port. We don't have 20 minutes. How many of your people are at the port? 3. The vessel in the harbor. I have nothing for that. The 2 still docked. We can slow the loading, but 3 people against however many Carver has there. I'm coming, Dorian said. 10 minutes. He hung up, looked at Greer. 73%. How long, he said. 2 minutes. Maybe less. 2 minutes. He looked at Serafina. She was looking at the progress bar, too. The vessel in the harbor mouth, she said. Is there a way to stop it before it clears? Not legally, not in 2 minutes. But not legally, she said. Not a question. You have options that aren't legal. He looked at her. I have a contact who runs harbor patrol independently. He owes me a significant debt. If I call him right now, he can put a patrol vessel across the harbor mouth inside 4 minutes. It creates an incident, a stopping incident. He paused. It means the incident is publicly attributed to the Voss organization. It means we're not invisible in this. She held his gaze. How many people are on that vessel? He didn't look away. I don't know, enough that if it clears the harbor, call him, she said. He called. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. The man on the other end didn't ask questions because men who owe Dorian Voss significant debts and receive calls at midnight understand the architecture of the call. 91% on the drive. He looked at Serafina. She was looking at the servers. Her face was still doing what it had been doing all night. The controlled surface, the deliberate breathing. But underneath it, visible now to him in a way it hadn't been 6 days ago, something that was not fear. Something that was forward-facing. Something that had decided. When this is over, she said, not looking at him, looking at the servers. When whatever happens tonight is finished, I want to see everything, the full documentation, everything Greer has compiled, everything in that archive. She paused. I want to know the full scope of what he built. My father. I want to understand it completely. He looked at her profile. Why? Because I'm the only person who can identify the parts of it I was directly inside, she said. If I understand the full architecture, I can identify those parts for whoever is prosecuting this. Her jaw set. And because I am done not knowing things, I am done being kept from information about my own life. She turned and looked at him then, directly. I want to know. 100%. The drive ejected. Greer handed it to Dorian. Dorian handed it to Serafina. She looked at the drive in her hand and then put it in her coat pocket. They moved. Out of the basement, up through the building, back into the corridor where Birch's operative was holding position. Greer between them, Edmund ahead of them in Birch's operative's custody, out through the staff entrance into the cold, wet night air. The rain had gotten heavier. The street outside the clinic was empty. The clinic's exterior looked exactly as it had when they'd arrived, which meant the window of visibility before someone noticed the situation inside was still open, but closing. The car was there. 2 cars. Birch had called in a second vehicle. Edmund went in the first with Birch's operative. Greer went in the second. Dorian opened the rear door of the second car and looked at Serafina. She was standing in the rain, looking at the clinic, the building that her father had shown her at age 20 as a demonstration of what happened to people who didn't cooperate. She was looking at it the way you look at something you've been afraid of for a long time, when you are finally standing outside it rather than inside it, and you're trying to find out if it looks different from this side. Serafina, he said. She turned, got in the car. The drive to the South Port took 9 minutes. Dorian spent 6 of them on the phone. Birch coordinating the dock positions, his harbor contact confirming the patrol vessel was in position at the harbor mouth. Marcus patched in, relaying Harlow's status. Harlow was moving. Federal authority was being assembled with the particular speed that only happened when someone showed a federal official documentation that implicated other federal officials, which Greer's archive apparently did, because Harlow's voice, relayed through Marcus, had the sound of a man who had just seen something he can no longer pretend he hasn't seen. He's moving, Marcus said. 20 minutes. Maybe less now. We're at the port in 3, Dorian said. Carver's people know something is wrong. The clinic went dark on their communication network 7 minutes ago. They know. How armed? Unknown. Dorian... Marcus stopped. Aldrich Vane. He's not accounted for. He was outside your building earlier tonight, and now I have no location on him. Dorian went still. He knows I'm at the port. If he's been monitoring the situation tonight, yes. He knows where this is going. Then he's already there. The car stopped at the port perimeter. Dorian was out before it fully stopped, moving, the rain heavy enough now to blur the dock lights, the air salt and diesel and cold. The South Port at midnight was a different geography than the public face of it. Industrial, functional, the scale of large machinery making human bodies very small. 3 vessels docked along the primary loading pier, 2 of them still being worked. The third, across from the other 2, a larger vessel, was lit up and loaded, its mooring lines in the process of being cast off when Dorian reached the pier. Birch was already there with his 2 people. "Loading crew on the second vessel is down," Birch said, his voice in Dorian's earpiece. "First vessel is still active. I count 6 of Carver's people on the pier, armed, not visibly yet, but the jackets are heavy. And the vessel already in the harbor. My harbor contact has it stopped at the mouth. The master is refusing to back down. There will be an official incident." Birch's voice was neutral on that. It was what it was. Carver's man on the pier, the one running coordination, that's Tallis. Gray jacket, east end of the pier. Dorian moved toward the east end. The rain hammered the pier surface, the water black on both sides, the dock lights making everything sodium yellow and wrong-shadowed. Tallis saw him coming. Tallis was not an unprepared man, which was how he'd run Carver's network logistics for as long as he had. And his hand went to his jacket and then stopped. Because Birch was coming from the other direction, and 2 of Birch's people were already flanking from the vessel side, and Tallis ran a fast count and came up short. "This is over," Dorian said. He stopped 6 feet from Tallis. His voice was level, just carrying over the rain. "Your vessel in the harbor is stopped. Your documentation is in federal hands by morning. Harlow's authority arrives in—" He checked his watch. 12 minutes. Tallis looked at him. A compact man, 50, the specific look of someone who has spent his career in the management of terrible logistics and considers himself professional about it. "You've burned everything you built to do this," he said. "Some of it," Dorian said. "Yes. Carver will be significantly occupied," Dorian said. "So will everyone whose name appears in Greer's documentation." He looked at Tallis steadily. "The question for you right now is whether you want to be the person who makes the next 15 minutes complicated, or the person who walks off this pier without additional injuries." Tallis looked at the pier around him. The math was what it was. He took his hand away from his jacket. That was when the shot came. Not from Tallis. From behind. From the direction of the stacked cargo containers at the pier's edge. The specific crack of a high-caliber round. And the man to Dorian's left went down. One of Birch's people, not Birch, hitting the pier surface with the absolute physical completeness of someone who has been shot and is no longer in the conversation. The pier exploded into motion. Carver's 6 people on the pier went for their weapons simultaneously. Tallis's negotiating position apparently having a different backup plan than he'd indicated, and Birch's response was immediate and physical, and the pier became a very loud and very fast problem that Dorian was in the middle of while also trying to locate the shooter in the cargo containers, because whoever had taken the shot from cover was not one of the dock workers, and the angle of it and the caliber was specific and deliberate, and the target had been Dorian himself, he understood, and had missed by approximately 2 feet because Dorian had moved left at the wrong moment for the shooter and the right moment for himself. He moved toward the containers. Behind him, the pier was the controlled chaos of Birch, handling 6 people with 2 operatives, and he trusted Birch absolutely, and therefore could move toward the containers without managing the pier simultaneously, which was the entire point of having someone like Birch. He moved low and fast between stacked units, the rain noise covering his movement, the shot having come from the 3rd row back. He'd tracked the sound, triangulated it automatically the way you do when you've spent years in spaces where that skill is not academic. 3rd row. 2nd container from the water side. He came around the end of the row and saw the man crouched at the far end, repositioning a bolt-action rifle, suppressed but not silent at this range, the man's attention still on the gap between containers that he'd fired through, not yet having registered that the target had moved in a direction he hadn't calculated. Aldrich Vane. He was exactly as Dorian remembered him. 4 years older, harder, the specific look of a man who has spent those years in places that do not soften you. He had the rifle up and was scanning back toward the pier, looking for Dorian's position, and he found it a half-second too late. Dorian covered the distance between them before Vane could complete the adjustment of the rifle's angle. He hit Vane's rifle arm first, driving it upward, the shot that discharged going into the night sky harmlessly, and then they were close enough that the rifle was irrelevant, and what remained was the particular brutality of two men at very close range, who both know how to do this. Vane was good. Dorian had known he was good. You didn't run enforcement for a major consortium by being otherwise. He took the impact of Dorian's initial strike and turned it, redirected, came back with an elbow to the side of Dorian's head that connected and made the world lurch sideways for 1 full second, not down, not out, but sideways, the dock lights smearing in his vision, rain in his eyes. He caught his balance on the container wall. Vane had pulled something, not the rifle, something shorter, a blade or a backup weapon. And Dorian was back in motion before Vane completed the draw, inside his arm again, controlling the weapon hand, taking the hit to his ribs that Vane landed while both their hands were occupied with the weapon, because sometimes you accept a hit to control the thing that kills you. The backup weapon, a compact firearm, which was what it was, discharged between them, and the round went into the container wall 6 inches from Dorian's left shoulder. He felt the impact of the muzzle blast before he felt the absence of being shot, which was the particular unpleasant sequence of events that means you are still alive, but your body hasn't confirmed it yet. He drove Vane's weapon hand against the container until he let go of it. Vane's free hand went to Dorian's throat, a professional grip. The kind of throttle designed not to strangle, but to control, to use the reflex of self-protection to pull someone's attention from their own hands. And Dorian let it. Let Vane have his throat and used the 2 seconds of Vane's confidence in that grip to reposition entirely and put Vane's own weight against him, and Vane went into the container wall back first with enough force that Dorian heard the sound of it in his own chest. Vane didn't go down. That was the problem. He was hurt. Dorian could see it in his left arm, which was hanging at an angle that suggested the shoulder had given something, but he was upright and his right hand was reaching for something else. Another option, because men like Vane always had another option, and Dorian had used 2 seconds and needed a third. Voss! Vane's voice came out compressed, the sound of someone managing significant pain through a filter of professional control. You know what you've done tonight. You know what comes next. Yes, Dorian said. He was breathing hard. Both of them were. Rain on the containers, rain on the pier behind them, the sounds of the dock fight finishing itself in Birch's capable hands. Carver's network will be considerably smaller by morning, Dorian said. And you think Harlow protects you? You think federal involvement is cover? You've put yourself in the middle of something that doesn't end because you filed documentation. But Vane's right hand had found something. Another weapon. A backup. The man was carrying 3 options tonight, which said something about how he'd expected this to go. You brought your name into this, your operation. You think that... Vane, Dorian said, I need you to stop talking. Vane brought the 3rd weapon up, and something hit him from the left. Not Dorian, not Birch. Something lower, a figure that had come around the far end of the container row in the dark, and the rain without announcement, moving with that specific efficiency that Dorian now recognized. And it was Serafina who was supposed to be in the car, and she had hit Vane's weapon arm with a cargo tie-down bar that she had apparently found on the ground between the containers, and she had hit it with the focused force of someone who had spent 24 years learning that when you finally move, you make it count. The 3rd weapon went across the wet concrete. Vane turned toward her, reflexive, the body's automatic reorientation toward a new threat. And Dorian moved into the opening that created and had Vane secured with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting for exactly that window, Vane's good arm behind him, the bad shoulder providing sufficient leverage, the whole complicated, violent problem finally arriving at its structural conclusion. Vane was cuffed with his own equipment. Dorian stood in the rain between cargo containers, breathing in deliberate, measured counts, and looked at Serafina. She was standing 5 feet away with the tie-down bar still in her hand, rain running down her face, coat soaked through. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were very bright. I said, stay in the car, he said. I know, she said. Vane had a weapon. I know, she said. I had the bar. She looked at the bar, Put it down carefully on the ground beside her, like setting down something she'd picked up for a specific purpose and no longer needed. Her hands were shaking slightly. He could see it from 5 feet away. She looked at her hands. "I know they're shaking," she said. "That's just adrenaline. I'm not—" "I know," he said. She looked up at him. He looked at her. Rain between them and everything else that was between them. 6 days, a cathedral, files from 11 years ago, a city that was currently in the process of changing shape around them both, a network dismantling, a pier where the sounds of the Birch-managed situation had gone quiet, which meant it was finished in the way Birch always finished things. Serafina's coat was completely soaked. Her hair had come down. Her face was rain-wet and white, and more real than anything had looked in a long time. And she was standing between cargo containers at the South Port at midnight, holding herself very still while her hands stopped shaking. And she was not falling apart. That was the thing he kept coming back to, standing in the rain between cargo containers with Aldrich Vane secured on the ground behind him, and the sounds of the Southport dock settling into the particular quiet that follows violence. The quiet that isn't peace, but is the absence of active threat, which was the closest thing to peace this kind of night produced. Serafina's hands had stopped shaking. She'd looked at them until they stopped, the way someone looks at a fire they're trying to will smaller, and then she'd put them in her coat pockets and looked at him with those dark, steady eyes and said nothing. He said nothing either. Birch appeared at the end of the container row, a gash above his left eyebrow that he hadn't treated and wasn't treating now, blood running into the crease of his eye socket, his expression exactly what it always was. 6 secured on the pier. 2 of Carver's people ran. We have descriptions. Marcus is tracking. My man who went down is alive. Through and through, left shoulder. He's been stabilized. A pause. The vessel in the harbor is cooperating with harbor patrol. The 2 at dock are not going anywhere. Another pause. Harlow's authority arrives in 7 minutes. There will be federal presence at this location in 7 minutes, Dorian. Dorian looked at Vane on the ground. He goes with Harlow. Understood. Edmund Vale as well, both of them. He looked at Birch directly. Not before. Not through any other channel. Harlow personally takes custody of both. Birch nodded, went back toward the pier. Dorian looked at Serafina. We need to be clear of the pier before federal authority arrives. Because you being seen here creates a different set of complications than the ones we're already managing. He moved toward the pier's perimeter access. Come on. Came. They moved through the port service roads in the dark. The industrial geography of Black Ridge's working waterfront at midnight, all shadow and sodium light and the smell of the harbor, and found the second car where they'd left it on the access road outside the port perimeter. Dorian's driver got them moving immediately, no questions, which was what he'd hired for. In the car, she looked out the window. He looked at his phone. Marcus had sent 4 messages in the last 10 minutes, each one a piece of the picture assembling itself. Harlow's team confirmed, federal authority active. The vessel in the harbor was being boarded, the Harrow Clinic had been flagged for immediate federal review, and Greer was in protective custody pending his formal cooperation agreement. And one more message sent 2 minutes ago, just 3 words. Edmund is secured. He put the phone in his pocket, looked at the window. The rain had begun to ease. Not stopped, but softer now, the city going from assault to something more like its normal condition of persistent gray damp. It's done, he said. She didn't respond immediately. He waited. Not yet, she said. There'll be years of it. The prosecution, the documentation review, the people who had protection from the network trying to manage what they know. She was still looking at the window. But the machinery of it is broken. Yes. A pause. The people on that vessel. Harlow's team has the vessel, he said. There are protocols. It will be handled by people who handle that specific kind of situation. Will they be all right? It was the question of someone who already knew the answer would be complicated and was asking it anyway because pretending the complexity wasn't there was no longer something she was willing to do. Some of them will be fine, he said. Some of them will have a harder time than others. There are organizations, legitimate ones, outside this city, that work specifically with people who've been through what those people have been through. Greer's documentation will help. Having a complete record of what happened to each person is... He stopped. It matters. It matters for what comes next for each of them. She turned from the window and looked at him. You know about those organizations. I've been thinking about them, he said, for the last 6 days. She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, Black Ridge passed, the waterfront giving way to the older districts, the buildings getting taller, the city getting denser, the weight of it visible at this hour in the way it wasn't during the day when commerce and noise filled in all the gaps. At night you could see the gaps. What happens to you now? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I made a choice tonight that has consequences I was clear-eyed about when I made them. Some of the arrangements that have kept this empire stable for 8 years are no longer in effect. Some of the relationships that allowed me to operate in a way that was, he paused, contained. Some of those are finished. He looked at his hands in the dark of the car. There will be contraction. There will be a period of significant instability. Some of what I built will have to be rebuilt differently. How much differently? Considerably. He looked at her. I knew what it cost when I called Harlow. I called him anyway. She looked at his face for a long time with that precise, unsentimental attention she gave everything important. Why? She said. Not demanding, genuinely asking, the way she had asked things all week when she'd decided she wanted to actually know the answer rather than the available cover story. He thought about the photograph on his phone. He thought about a file dated from when she was 11 years old, with her name on it, written in the clinical language of a hospital intake form and then buried so no one would ever have to deal with what it said. He thought about the specific anger that had moved through him when he'd read it, and that had not left him since. Not the hot, imprecise kind, but the low, steady kind that is less about feeling and more about permanent orientation. Because it was the right thing to do, he said. Serafina looked at him for one more moment and then turned back to the window. It was not the cynical, complicated look of someone being managed. It was the look of someone receiving information they didn't know what to do with yet and had decided to hold carefully until they did. They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. The penthouse was exactly as they had left it. The door locked, the rooms dark, the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass on all sides, 42 floors of it. Serafina went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and didn't do anything, just stood there. He filled a glass of water and set it in front of her without saying anything, and she picked it up and drank half of it and set it down and looked at the kitchen as if she was seeing it for the first time, which he understood. There is a version of a familiar space that you only see clearly after something large has happened, when your perception has been reset by events and everything that was ordinary looks briefly true. Your man who was shot, she said. Birch's operative. He'll recover? Does he have family? A sister in the Millhaven district. He looked at her. I'll make sure she knows tonight that he's okay. She nodded. She picked up the glass and drank the rest of the water. Her coat was still damp. Her hair was still down. She had a red mark along the inside of her right forearm, from the tie-down bar, the impact running back through her grip, that would become a bruise by morning. He could see it from where he stood. She saw him see it. It doesn't hurt much, she said. It will in the morning. I know. She looked at the mark. I've had worse. He knew that. He had 12 years of documentation that said he knew that. The knowledge of it sat in him the same way it had sat in him since he'd first opened those files. Not diminishing, not becoming something he could put away, but settling. Becoming part of the fixed landscape of what he understood about this specific person and what had been done to her and who had done it. And the fact that it was finished now in the way that legal and practical consequences could make things finished, which was not the same as healed, but was a different thing and a necessary thing, and was what was available to do in the world as it actually existed. Edmund will go to trial, he said. The documentation that Greer compiled, combined with what you can provide as a direct witness, the prosecution will be substantial. It will take time. It will be public. Some of it will be very difficult. He looked at her directly. You don't have to do any of it alone. There are people, not people I direct, independent people, who can support you through that process. She looked at him. Are you telling me that because you feel responsible for what happened to me? I'm telling you because it's true, and I want you to know it's available to you. Do you feel responsible? He held her gaze. I feel like I should have found this faster, he said. I feel like I made choices over years about what I did and didn't look at in this city, and the things I didn't look at, some of them were things like your father's network. Things I knew existed in some form and calculated as outside my scope of concern. He paused. I was wrong about the scope. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't know me, she said. You couldn't have known specifically about me. No, he said, but there were others before you. I knew there were others. He looked at the window, the city beyond it. I managed that knowledge in a way that was convenient for what I was trying to build. I won't make that argument to you as a defense. I'm telling you so you know where I actually stand. It was the most he'd said about his own accounting in years. It came out level and without performance. He wasn't asking her for anything. He was just putting it where she could see it. She looked at him for a long time. You went to the clinic first, she said. You could have gone to the port. The port was the larger operational problem. The people at the port... She paused. You went to the clinic first because Greer was there and Greer needed to get out. And because I told you the clinic first was right. Yes. You listened to me. You were right. She looked at the counter. My father never listened to anything I said, she said. Not because I was wrong, because my being right was... It destabilized something for him. Something about how he needed to see me. She said it without particular affect. Not as a wound being displayed, more as a fact being archived. He needed me to be wrong and small. It was structural. He needed it. I know, Dorian said. She looked at him. You read the files. All of them. Something moved in her face. Not pain exactly. Something older than pain. The specific expression of a person who has known something their entire life and then learns that someone else now knows it too, and the mixture of relief and grief and exposure that comes with that. The complex human feeling of being seen in something you have carried alone for a very long time. Then you know everything, she said. I know the documented record, he said. That's not the same as everything. The documented record is what someone else managed to write down and file away in the right place. What it cost you to live inside that record, he paused. I don't know that. I only know the surface of it, and I know that's mine to not presume further on. She was very still. Then she put both hands flat on the kitchen counter and looked at them. Those open hands she kept choosing to keep open, and breathed out through her nose slowly and carefully the way she'd been breathing all week, the controlled release of someone who has learned that air is something you can manage when everything else isn't. Okay, she said. The word came out quiet and complete, like a door settling into its frame. He didn't ask what it meant. Some things you let be what they are. She went to her room and slept, he assumed, because no sound came from that direction and she needed it, and her body was not a person who had options tonight other than sleep. He sat in the living room for a while and looked at the city and then went to his study and wrote a message to his contact at the harbor. A careful, precise thank you that covered the debt and discharged the obligation and left nothing hanging, and then wrote a longer set of instructions to Marcus about the morning sequencing. The federal authority would be managing the port situation. Greer's cooperation agreement would move through Harlow's office. The Harrow Clinic would be in federal jurisdiction by 8 a.m. The Southport vessels were secure. What remained for Dorian to manage was the internal consequence, the relationships inside his own structure that had been strained or broken by tonight's choices, the operational adjustments that would take months to settle, the contraction he'd described to Serafina in the car. He wrote the list of it. It was long. He wrote it without avoidance, without finding the version of it that was smaller than it was. And when he'd finished, he looked at it for a while and then put it aside for the morning, because some things were morning problems and tonight had already been used up entirely. He went to bed at 4 a.m. He slept for 4 hours. When he woke, the city outside was gray with early morning, the rain fully gone, the sky the pale, indeterminate color it gets before it decides what kind of day it's going to be. He went to the kitchen. She was there. Not at the window this time. She was sitting at the counter, actually sitting, both arms on the counter surface, coffee in front of her, with a sketchbook open that he hadn't seen before. She was drawing. Her hand moved in small, certain strokes across the paper, not looking up when he came in the concentrated middle of something. He poured coffee. He didn't look at what she was drawing. He sat at the counter with his phone and worked through the overnight messages from Marcus. 6 of them, methodical, each one a piece of the morning accounting. The formal federal presence at the port confirmed. The clinic under review. Edmund Vale and Aldrich Vane in federal custody. Harlow personally managing both intake processes. The 3 remaining members of the Harrow Foundation Board who hadn't been directly documented in Greer's files were being contacted for voluntary cooperation. 3 of the 7 active sites connected to the Foundation's network had already been secured. He read all of it and sent 3 responses and drank his coffee, and she continued to draw beside him, her hand moving with the ease of something that has come back to muscle memory after a long absence, like a language you stopped speaking but never actually forgot. After a while, she said, without looking up from the sketchbook, "Marcus sent me a message this morning." He looked up. "About what?" "He said that the documentation I can provide as a direct witness, the things I know from my own experience of my father's operation, things that won't be in any file because they were never written down, will be critical to the prosecution's case." She turned a page in the sketchbook. Started something new. "He said there is a federal victim advocate who would work with me directly on how to document that information in a way that is both usable for prosecution and—" She paused. "He used the word manageable. For me." "Marcus chooses his words carefully," Dorian said. "I know, I could tell." She kept drawing. "I'm going to do it. Work with the advocate." Her hand moved across the page. "I've been thinking about it since last night, about what I said in the basement, that I wanted to know the full scope of what my father built. And I realized this morning that knowing it isn't actually what I want." She paused. "What I want is for the people who are inside it to have someone say what happened to them in a room where it actually matters. And I can be part of making that happen if I provide what I know." She looked up from the sketchbook. "So I'm going to do it." He looked at her. "All right," he said. "It will take time. Months, probably. The trial process—" "I know what it takes," he said. "You have time." A pause. "You have—" He stopped, restarted. "You can stay here, for as long as the process takes. Longer, if you want." He looked at his coffee. "This is your home too, whatever the arrangement was or is or was supposed to be. You don't have to define it right now, but you don't have to leave either." She looked at him for a long moment, that precise, unsentimental look, reading him the way she read rooms, carefully, thoroughly, not flinching from what she found. "You burned a significant piece of what you built," she said, "to do what you did last night. Some of it. Doesn't that mean you need to rebuild some things?" "Yes." He met her gaze. "I've been thinking about what the rebuild looks like. Some of it—" He looked at the city outside the window. "Some of it should look different than what it replaced. There are resources I've controlled for 8 years that have been used for things that—" He paused. "The communities in the city that the network fed on, they have needs that are real and ongoing. Clinics, housing, support infrastructure. Those needs don't end because the organization that exploited them is dismantled." He looked back at her. "I've been thinking about what it looks like to redirect resources toward those things instead of away from them." She looked at him for a long time. He held it. He was not asking for absolution, and she was not offering it, and both of them were clear on that. He was telling her the truth about where his thinking was, which was what she'd asked for, and the rest of it was going to be worked out over months and years in the actual world through actual choices rather than through any conversation either of them had in this kitchen. "I'd like to be part of that," she said. "The rebuilding, whatever it looks like. I'd like to—" She stopped. "I have a degree I've never used. I can learn things I haven't learned yet. I don't want to be managed through this. I want to be useful in it." "You were useful last night," he said. Something crossed her face, very small, almost a smile. Not quite, but closer than anything he'd seen in 6 days of watching her practice being in a space that was safe, learning the vocabulary of it, building towards something she didn't have a name for yet. I hit a man with a cargo bar, she said. Effectively, he said. She looked back at the sketchbook. He looked at his phone. They sat in the kitchen together in the early morning with the city outside going about the first business of its day, and both of them engaged in the quiet, ordinary task of being alive on the other side of something, which is not a dramatic task and does not resolve into a single clear moment, but is instead the continuous, daily, imperfect work of people who have come through a storm and are finding out, slowly, what shape they are in afterward. The weeks that followed were long and unglamorous, and nothing like what the 6 days before them had been. Federal proceedings moved at the rate federal proceedings moved, which was not fast. Greer's documentation entered the formal evidentiary process, and the prosecution team spent the first 3 weeks doing nothing but verifying and cross-referencing its contents against financial records, communication logs, and the testimony of individuals recovered from the Foundation's operational sites. Serafina met with the federal victim advocate twice in the first week, and then weekly after that, in a building on the north side of the city that was not connected to any law enforcement infrastructure and that she had chosen herself from a list of 3 options. She didn't tell Dorian much about those meetings. He didn't ask. She came home from them looking tired in the way that a specific kind of work makes you tired. Not depleted, but used, like a muscle after effort. And she ate dinner and sometimes talked about something else entirely and sometimes didn't talk at all. And he made room for both. He was managing his own situation in parallel. The restructuring of the Voss operation was not clean or quick. 3 relationships that had been foundational to the stability of the past 8 years were finished, and the consequences of that had to be absorbed across several weeks of careful, constant, detail-level management. He was at his desk for long hours, and Marcus was in and out of the penthouse regularly, and there were phone calls at hours that were not reasonable and decisions that were not comfortable, and a sustained period of genuine uncertainty about the shape of what was being built in place of what was being dismantled. He made those decisions and did not pretend they were easy. Nadia came to the penthouse for the first time in the 3rd week. She was a small, direct woman who looked at Dorian with exactly the kind of frank appraisal that friends of people who have been through things give to the new forces in those people's lives. She sat in the living room with Serafina and drank the tea that Serafina made. Serafina had learned his kitchen completely now, moved through it with the ease of ownership, and looked at him 3 separate times with an expression that was not hostile but was not yet decided. He respected that. He offered her nothing to manage it. You don't manage the people who were there when you weren't. Nadia came back the following week without occasion. Then the week after. The penthouse began to have a characteristic it hadn't had before. The specific quality of a space where more than 2 kinds of life are happening, where someone exists and cooks and draws and has visitors, where there are sounds that aren't the building systems, or his phone, or his footsteps. He noticed the quality without naming it. He let it be what it was. The north room, the one with afternoon light, became hers in practice before it was formally acknowledged as such. He would pass its open door in the late afternoon and see her there, not always painting, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting in the light with her sketchbook open and her hand moving in the particular concentrated quiet of someone who is using time rather than enduring it. He did not stop and look in unless she spoke, but he registered the fact of it. The room being used was significant in the way that very small things are significant when they reverse a long condition. Edmund Vale's trial began in the 5th month. It was public, as Dorian had said it would be. The coverage was substantial and not always accurate, and the weeks of it were difficult in specific ways that Dorian could not manage for her. He went with her on the first day, not into the courtroom, not in any visible capacity, but in the car and in the building's vicinity, in a way that meant she was not physically alone with the approach to it. On that first morning, she sat in the car for 2 minutes before getting out. He sat next to her. He didn't say anything. He didn't touch her shoulder or her hand. He just sat there, in the specific way he'd sat on the hallway floor across from her on the 4th night of their marriage, at the same level, maximum distance available in the space, not performing anything. After 2 minutes, she said, "Okay," and got out of the car. He watched the building door close behind her. Then he called Marcus and did 2 hours of work and came back and was there when she came out. She didn't cry in front of him that day. She didn't that week. She did once, about 3 weeks into the trial. Not at him, not because of anything he'd done, but simply because it had built up past the capacity of even her control. And she was in the kitchen when it happened. And he was in the hallway. And he came to the kitchen doorway and stood there and didn't move. And after a while it stopped, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her face and said nothing, and he said nothing. And then she took her hands away and her face was red and very real. And she said, "I'm going to make tea." And she did. And he sat at the counter and they drank it. Edmund Vale was convicted on 14 counts. The sentencing was attended by 7 people Dorian had arranged to have present, quietly, without announcement, who had been directly affected by the Foundation's network and who had chosen to be there. Serafina stood in the hallway outside the courtroom afterward and didn't speak for a long time. He stood near her, not next to her, near her, waiting. "It's not enough," she said finally. 14 counts and a sentence is not... It doesn't... None of the counts are the ones that... She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I know it's what the law has. I know it's what was available. I know the documentation that Greer had was the maximum possible evidentiary foundation, and this is what it produced." She looked at the hallway floor. "I just need to say out loud that it's not enough, even knowing it's what was possible." "I know," he said. "You're not going to tell me it is enough." "No," he said. She looked at him. "Good," she said. And then, because she was who she was and had survived what she had survived by never pretending the gap between what is and what should be was smaller than it actually was, she straightened her back and lifted her chin and said, "Let's go home." He looked at her. The word home. She'd said it without hesitation. He wasn't sure she'd noticed. He thought she probably had. The foundation she established took another 4 months to formally charter. She did it herself, and not through his resources, though he made a specific category of resource available to her, and she accepted it with the precise, deliberate clarity of someone who has thought carefully about the terms on which she accepts things, through a structure that Marcus helped her navigate, and that she insisted on understanding completely before signing anything. The advocate who'd worked with her through the trial process became its first staff member. Nadia joined the board. It operated out of 3 rooms in a building in the Millhaven district, not far from the property where Dorian had taken her the night the city had started to come apart. She named it without consulting him. When he read the name in the charter documentation Marcus brought him, he sat with it for a moment and then set the document on his desk and looked out the window at Blackridge and thought about a girl of 11 whose injuries had been documented and buried by her own father, and a woman of 20 who had left in the night with nowhere to go and gone anyway, and the particular quality of a person who has survived inside a terrible system while quietly, carefully keeping their hands open. The name was The Record, a foundation for survivors of trafficking and abuse, dedicated to ensuring that what happened to each person was documented completely and in their own words, and preserved and not buried. He never mentioned to her that he'd read it. But he did, the following week, do something that required a phone call that cost him an obligation. A different kind of obligation than the ones the night at the port had ended, a voluntary one, and that resulted in a substantial and anonymously donated endowment arriving at the Foundation's operating account. She called him from the Foundation's offices an hour after it arrived. He was at his desk. "Was this you?" she said. "I don't know what you're referring to." A pause. He could hear the quality of her breath on the phone, still, deliberate. "Dorian? You need operating capital for the first 2 years," he said. "The early period of any organization is the most resource-intensive and the most fragile. That's practical information, not—" "Dorian," she said again. Quieter. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It was me." She said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "Thank you." He looked at his desk, at his hands flat on the surface of it, at the city outside his window, which on this particular afternoon was doing what it did occasionally in the later part of the year, going golden, the specific low autumn light that made even Blackridge look like something that wasn't broken. The light that made you believe for a few hours that things could be different than they were, which was not a belief Dorian Voss had spent much of his life entertaining, but which he was finding lately less resistible than he used to. "Don't thank me," he said. "Make it work." "I intend to," she said. He heard her smile in it. Not full. She didn't do full yet, not often, not easily, and he would not have expected her to, and he would not have wanted her to pretend to. But something. The particular sound of a person who has arrived somewhere they weren't sure they'd reach and is quietly, privately, putting weight on the floor to see if it holds. The Foundation's first event was a small gathering, 12 people in those 3 rooms in the Millhaven district, survivors who had been connected to the services the Foundation was building toward, the advocate and 2 social workers and a legal representative who had agreed to provide pro bono support. Serafina had spent a week preparing for it and had not slept well the 2 nights before it, and had been quiet in a specific way that morning that he recognized as the particular quiet of someone standing at the edge of a thing they've been moving toward. He did not attend. It was not his space. He understood that clearly. She came home at 7 in the evening and came through the door and stopped in the entry hall, and he was in the living room and looked up from his work. Her face was not transformed, not altered by the day into something that erased what had been there before. She was still the same person, still carrying everything she had always carried, still the specific combination of damage and deliberateness and bone-deep defiance that she had been on the night she'd walked into a cathedral and married a man she'd never met in order to survive. All of that was still there, but there was something added to it, sitting alongside the rest, not replacing anything, just present. Something that looked from where he was standing like a person who has done a real thing in the real world and found that they were capable of it. She looked at him across the room. "There was a woman there today," she said, 43 years old. She'd been in the Foundation's network for 6 years. She came to the event because the advocate called her. She almost didn't come. She paused. She stayed until the end, and when she was leaving, she asked if she could come back. Serafina's voice was very even. "And I said yes, and she nodded, and she left." A beat. "That's all. That's what happened." "That's not nothing," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't." She came into the living room and sat on the couch. Not across from him, not strategically distant, just sat where she sat and picked up the book that had been sitting on the cushion beside her for the past week. The one she read 10 pages of, and then sat down and picked up again 2 days later, the slow, deliberate reading of someone who has time now, who is learning what it feels like to have time. And she opened it and read. He went back to his work. They sat in the living room in the evening quiet of the penthouse, and the city outside continued below them, Blackridge in its full complicated difficulty, its corruption and its beauty and its stubborn ongoing life, all of it present and none of it resolved, because cities do not resolve. They only change form. And what had changed in this particular city, in this particular year, was not small, but was also not finished. It was a beginning, the kind of beginning that requires years and decades, and the constant unglamorous work of people who have decided they will not look away anymore. Outside, the first stars were appearing over the harbor. The light was going gold, and then going soft. The city's noise was settling into its evening register. He set his phone face down on the arm of the chair. She turned a page. The scars she carried were still there, would always be there, were not the whole of her. He knew the full documented record of how she had come to carry them, and he held that knowledge with the weight it deserved and would hold it that way for the rest of his life. He had not saved her. She had survived before he existed in her world, and would have survived without him, in some form, because that was what she was made of. But he had made a choice, and then another choice, and then a choice on a pier at midnight that cost him considerably, and that he would make again without deliberation. He was not a good man. He did not believe in that simple accounting. He was a man who had done terrible things and managed a terrible empire, and looked away from terrible knowledge when it was convenient and had arrived by a route that was not clean or straight, at a point where he was no longer willing to do that last part. Whether that was enough, whether enough was even a sensible frame, was not a question he expected to answer cleanly. But he was here, and she was here. And the city outside was lit and ongoing and complicated and alive. And for the first time in years, that felt like something. She turned another page. He looked at the window. The stars held.